Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. In this episode, Austin Kopic is joining me, and we're going to be looking at the astrology of February 2025. Hey, Austin, welcome.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be back. Our last episode was the Big Year Ahead Forecast episode a month ago, and now we're going to get back into the details by looking at the astrology of February, and we have a lot to talk about this month, yeah?
Indeed, we do, and we have a lot looking forward and a lot looking back. January had some headlines. Did you hear about anything happening in January?
I didn't. You'll have to tell me. Has the news been busy, or has it been a slow news month?
Um, uh, you know what? There's been a few things. I wrote them down for you. Maybe will surprise you. There's like
Okay.
one less great U.S. city than there used to be.
Right. All right. Well, we're off to a good 4 years then, I guess, if it's only one currently. All
Still
right.
got
So,
a couple left.
yeah. In this episode, we're going to spend the first hour talking about news and events that happened since our last forecast a month ago and talking about the astrological correlations with those news stories. Then, in the second half of this episode, we're going to jump into a deep dive into the astrology of February and looking at the astrological aspects and alignments that are coming up over the course of the next month. So, as always, there's going to be timestamps on the Astrology Podcast website or in the description below this YouTube video if you want to jump ahead to the forecast. But first, before we get to the news, I want to give just a quick overview of the astrology of February. So first, here's the planetary aspects calendar for this month that was designed by Madeline Decotes from honeycomb.co, and it shows some of the different major alignments that are going to take place during the course of the month when they go exact, and the different orbs for when they're getting close, and so on and so forth. And here's the actual planetary aspects and alignments calendar for February from our wall calendar for the Astrology Podcast. So, right at the top of the month, we have a Neptune Venus conjunction on February 1st in the sign of Pisces. Venus is slowing down and has already entered its shadow degrees, where it's preparing to go retrograde in Aries next month. So, most of February is that process of slowing down and stationing retrograde. Then on February 4th, Venus moves into Aries, which is the sign it will go retrograde in. And the same day, Jupiter stations direct in the sign of Gemini. And this is its last station in that sign before it zooms over the next several months through the rest of Gemini and heads into Cancer later this year. The following week, there's a Mercury Cazimi when it conjoins the Sun on the 9th of February. Then the very next day, there's a Mercury Uranus square. The day after that, a Sun Uranus square on the 12th, or on the 11th, I should say. The following day, there's a full moon full moon in Leo that is squaring Uranus. So it's a very disruptive, unexpected full moon energy that we're going to be experiencing around the middle of the month. 2 days later, Mercury goes into Pisces on the 14th. Then a few days after that, the Sun moves into Pisces on the 18th. Mercury squares Jupiter on the 20th. Mars slows down finally in Cancer and stations direct on the 23rd of February, which is one of our most significant transits this month, besides Jupiter stationing direct in Gemini. Then Mercury conjoins Saturn on the 25th. And then finally, we get our second lunation of the month, which is a new moon in Pisces on the 27th of February. So those are some of the major alignments that we're going to be talking about later in this episode. But first, let's get to the news and let's talk about some major news and other stories that have been happening over the course of the past month. So there was a ton of news stories this month, and honestly, there's way more than we can actually cover in this episode. So we're just going to try to do as many as we can, and we're going to focus just on news stories that we noticed a really compelling astrological correlation with, since this is an astrology show primarily, and that's going to be our primary sorting mechanism, is just ones where we noticed an interesting astrological correlation. And we're going to go through chronologically, roughly starting in late December and early January, and then working our way forward through the month. So in terms of the first events and the first stories in our list, the major thing that we opened the year with was this really tense Mars-Pluto opposition that happened at the very beginning of January. And that energy was very much present on New Year's Eve because the moon swooped in and activated both of those planets in that opposition on New Year's Eve night. And as a result of that, there was actually three major stories that coincided all around the same time with that energy. So I had noted last fall when we first started talking about this opposition that sometimes when I was looking at past history that it had come up during acts of like terrorism or other things like that. And indeed, that night, one of the news stories was in New Orleans. There was this guy who drove through a group of pedestrians on New Year's Eve, killing more than 15 people and injuring more than 30. And it was this like gruesome, sort of horrific, not accident, but attack that happened on New Year's Eve. Did you see that, Austin?
Yeah, I did. It was hard to miss it. That and the fact that it was paired with another car-based sort of act of terror at the same time made it, yeah, difficult to ignore. Just a little bit about that Mars Pluto. So with Mars, we have, we sort of have the whole host of aggressive actions, and with Mars, we are, although Mars's sphere extends outside of war, we do have all of the like weapons and armor and attack and defense of war. But when Mars, as you noted, is paired with Pluto, so we get violence that seems nihilistic, right, or pointless. I'm sure the person who did that attack thought they had a point, but did that really, did that make a point? Did that advance a human cause? Like, no, not really. And that's very common with Mars Pluto. It is these acts that ultimately just seem like nihilistic acts of violence. Pluto sometimes robs things or conceals any sort of reason or meaning. It's just, in this with Mars Pluto, it's just the violence without the, well, we're attacking or defending and we're fighting over a thing. You just have the sort of violence hanging in the void.
Yeah, because Mars is already in ancient astrology was the planet of war and violence, and then Pluto takes things to extremes. So you
Hmm.
get like extreme acts of violence and destruction happening under hard configurations between those two planets. So there was that attack in New Orleans, but then also, as you mentioned, in Las Vegas, there was a guy who um, took a Tesla Cybertruck and parked it in front of Trump Hotel in Vegas, and he blew up a bomb there and also committed suicide basically at the same time in what was also seen as a sort of terrorist act at the time. Although later, some of the officials, the police, were saying that he wrote a suicide note, and it appears to have partially been like a suicide, and there was a lot of weird ambiguity surrounding that and what that was all about.
Yeah, it seemed very strange. I didn't get to the bottom of it, and it didn't seem like the bottom of it was available, which is also another Pluto thing, where things are, there's a level of mystery slash senselessness, whereas like, was there a hidden reason, or am I in error in looking for a reason and assuming that there are things that will make this totally make sense?
Yeah, he was trying to convey some sort of message, but weirdly, in some of his notes, he seemed to support Trump and Musk. So it wasn't clear ultimately like what his point was, but it was just another very striking image that we basically opened the year with right on that Mars Pluto opposition. And then we kind of thought that that was it, or those are the major news stories. But then um, days later, one of the things that began very at the very beginning of the year that was also tied in with the Mars Pluto opposition is that these fires started in Los Angeles. And they're still investigating the origins of the fires. But one of the reports I read in the Washington Post at one point said that they were investigating that a fire had been started on New Year's Eve as a result of fireworks, and that they put that fire out, but there was the possibility that it may have reignited days later, which sometimes happens as a result of winds. We're still not clear, like if that's true or what the origins of the fires truly were. But it would be interesting if those fires started also on the Mars-Pluto opposition on New Year's Eve or had their origins there. But regardless of what happened, there were these huge fires that began in Los Angeles days later, and then that's been one of the major catastrophes that happened this month.
Oh yeah. Well, and they may or may not have started on that Mars-Pluto opposition, but they became terrifyingly visible just as soon as Mars retrograded back into Cancer, which was another very important Mars thing early in January. Mars retrograded back into Cancer on the 6th. The fires are reported and already raging by the 7th. Um, and so Mars, that's a very important ingress or regress, because Mars will be in Cancer until the 17th of April. It's got a extended period of time there, and it's one of those the extensive damage, right? Like we've got as of this point, where not all of the fires are out. It certainly seems like the worst is over, but that doesn't mean that everything is over. We've got, let's see, there were some 200,000 people that were displaced so far as a result, coming up on 18,000 structures destroyed. Um, let's see, at least 29 people have been killed. There are a number that are still missing. It just basically destroyed all of Altadena. It's completely transformed the Palisades, and there are also spots of destruction from smaller fires and other places in Los Angeles. It's changed the face of the city uh, in a way that we won't probably fully understand for years. But one of the things that's like too easy astrologically, and unfortunately right on the nose, is that Cancer is the sign ruled by the moon. It's the place of like home, comfort, safety, nurturance, and so Mars, the red planet, the burner, coming into Cancer, and that correlating with the destruction of tens of thousands of homes, is it's unfortunately too literal, as we often see with the astrology.
Yeah, for sure. I had used the analogy when we were talking about, Mars retrograde, and how it just like Mars is so slow and it just like extends a Mars transit, so it's stretching it out over this extended period of time, what is usually like a very quick transit. And so I
Hmm.
use the analogy of like eating a really spicy hot sauce and then having the burning in your mouth that just like won't go away for an extended period of time. And I was really struck watching the news stories, how one of the things with the fires is that it was like fires, which is usually something that burns up quick and then goes away. But these fires were like extended over an extended period of time, and they were struggling to get them under control as they spread to different areas. And how that symbolism of like Mars retrograding Cancer was these fires that were just out of control and burning for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that these fires got started and burned through um, the sort of peak or center of the Mars retrograde, which is where Mars is as close to Earth as it gets, and also as bright and visible for the entirety of the night. So it's like most visible, closest, brightest. Um, this period. The the center of that Mars retrograde was on January 15th, and the days leading up to that saw the full moon in Cancer, which is usually quite nice, quite comfortable, quite quite moist and refreshing. Instead, exacerbate that Mars, because the full moon was conjunct that Mars retrograde, and so instead of putting out fires, it threw lunar gasoline on them.
Yeah, that's really striking.
You know,
Um, what
yeah, go ahead.
one of the things I noticed was astrologers were noting that in the incorporation chart for Los Angeles, that Mars is actually in Cancer in that chart, which is set for April 4th, 1850, and Mars is at 9 degrees of Cancer in that chart. But what I was really struck by is um,
Mm.
Mars had been retrograde earlier in that year, and it had actually gone retrograde in Cancer and Gemini over the months like leading up to this incorporation. So that means somehow this Mars retrograde that happened in Cancer this year was tying back to this previous Mars retrograde in the incorporation chart of the city itself.
Yeah, that's wild. And you see that Mars is retrograde back into Cancer, puts it right on the ascendant of the incorporation chart, like bringing that fire to the doorstep.
Yeah, I mean, this is a noon chart, but for sure, that as well as this huge Aries stellium that's in the Los Angeles chart itself that includes like Mercury, Saturn, Sun, Venus, Uranus, and Pluto all together in a line. So yeah, so that was a major thing that happened, and the impact of that is still being felt. I mean, one of the things that was notable.
The fires aren't still all out as of this recording. There's still some burning.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the things in the news, because we also have the Venus retrograde that's heating up, because at the beginning of January, Venus moved into Pisces, which is the sign it will retrograde back to. And so, in some ways, I started seeing a bunch of Venus retrograde stories coming up at this time as well. And it reminded me of the last Venus retrograde in 2023 when there was the fires in Hawaii during that Venus retrograde in Leo. And then for this one, of course, what was really striking in the news was that there were so many well-known celebrities who had homes in Los Angeles whose houses burned down during the course of this. So there were pictures of that in addition to just the, thousands and thousands of other just regular people who also lost their homes at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard to separate it from the kind of unrelated but somehow still related difficulties that the entertainment industry has been going through, which I would say are seem like Saturn Neptune things. But there, a lot of the big production companies, production and distribution companies have been having a hard time making money. People aren't going to the theaters. The business models are changing. Tastes are changing. Like there's this sort of it's actually really interesting to see that LA chart because it feels like a Saturn return for Hollywood as an industry. And I see now, looking at that chart, that the city of Los Angeles was founded with or incorporated with Saturn in Aries, and so it's about to have a Saturn return. And that's separate from the Mars thing as an indicator of fires, but it seems like there are portents gathering around LA. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, for sure.
It was, yeah,
So
as someone who lived there for 5+ years, it was it was strange to see, like, oh yeah, I remember going to someone's house in Altadena. I wonder if it's still there. Oh, I remember taking a trip out to the Palisades. I remember the Santa Ana winds, right, which are very strange if you haven't experienced them. I would, my memory of them is driving up to North Hollywood to go to Kung Fu class, and there'd just be this weird, fierce, hot wind blowing, which usually the wind is cool. Usually like, oh, it's a breeze, right? Ooh, or it's like a wind that bites or cuts, but it's this weird wind that blows off the desert. And it doesn't look like a windy day. It doesn't look stormy. You just get this, like, these bursts of hot wind coming from nowhere.
Well, and that was why the fires spread so quickly, right? Because of the winds. There's these crazy winds, and there were just these crazy, almost like apocalyptic pictures and like video coming out during the early phases of the fire about this like fiery inferno that was moving so fast and consuming so many different homes. And it reminded me of the Mars retrograde in Aries in 2020 when there was also these huge forest fires on the West Coast, and we just saw these pictures of from like San Francisco and other areas where
Oh yeah, we had
the
one get within
sky,
about 6 miles of the house then.
yeah, well, the sky was just completely red, so that it looked like you were on Mars from some of those pictures at the time.
Yeah, and it was that same combination of crazy wind. We had one um, climb maybe like went maybe 20 miles in one afternoon. Just zipped right up the five and destroyed, I think, about 5,000 structures within 15 miles of me. That was right on the Mars retrograde station, square Saturn.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I want to keep going since we've got a lot to
Yeah.
cover. But so one of the things that happened is that the Venus retrograde, with the Venus retrograde that was striking that, and the fires, is that it had actually delayed the Academy Award nominations. And Nick Diggin-Best and I just released a whole 7-hour deep dive where we went through the past century of this Venus retrograde, which recurs every 8 years. And we looked at the entire past century all the way back to when it started in 1905, and we kept finding that there were these important turning points in the Academy Awards where there was often some controversy or some first or some turning point in the Academy Award history whenever this Venus retrograde happened. And of course, this Academy Awards is about to happen the day after Venus stations retrograde at the very beginning of March. The station is March 1st and the Academy Awards are March 2nd. So the fires, the impact of the fires will no doubt feature prominently there. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Like 8 years ago, the last time this Venus retrograde happened was when in 2017 they called the wrong movie for Best Picture at the end, and there was this huge controversy because they called up the wrong people, and then they had to fix it. Like Jimmy Kimmel had to come out and say, "No, there's been a mistake," and then they brought the actual winners up on stage, and it was this huge debacle. So um, it will be interesting to see how that goes here. In preparation for that, one of the news stories that happened this month on January 5th is the Golden Globes happened. And that night, Demi Moore and Jodie Foster both won awards the same night. And I found this really striking because they were both born the same year, only a week apart, and they both were born with Venus retrograde in Scorpio. So I had actually talked about their charts as Venus retrograde examples back in a Venus retrograde episode in 2003. So I was really interested to see both of them winning these awards on the same night as Venus was getting ready to go retrograde in Pisces. And that night, transiting Venus, because they were born only a week apart, they both have Jupiter at 3 degrees of Pisces in the same place. And what's interesting is that Demi Moore was born with Pisces rising and Jodie Foster was born with Sagittarius rising. So they both have Jupiter ruling their ascendant, and it's placed at the same degree at 3 degrees of Pisces. And that night, when they both won the award, transiting Venus was exactly at 3 degrees of Pisces, conjoining both of their natal Jupiters. So it was this really interesting instance of like what's more broadly known as time twins, which is when two people are born at the same time and have roughly the same chart. And even though they were born a week apart, so it's not quite an exact instance of time twins, it's similar in concept because it's like, sometimes skeptics will argue about time twins and say, well, two people are born with the same chart have different destinies, so therefore astrology doesn't work. But the reality is what happens is that sometimes you'll see these overlaps in the two people's chronology at very important turning points in their life. And that's what we saw here with Demi Moore and Jodie Foster when they won this award the same night.
Yeah, that's great. It also, I don't know, it makes me want to try to pick winners based on transits because the ruler of the ascendant having a transit in conjunction from Venus like that is sort of as directly as astrology could describe getting an award. We talk about like luxuries and pleasures and art and relationships with Venus, but awards, like getting a golden thing for being awesome it is also very much a classical indication of Venus. If you look at Hellenistic delineations, I'm thinking of Firmicus. There for good Venus positions, he talks about how this person will be the winner of prizes. They will be congratulated for their work. They will get wreaths, et cetera, et cetera. Because Venus
Right.
is like, another thing Venus gives is um, pleasant social recognition or positive social recognition is like, you're great, right? Like that's a Venus thing.
Yeah, like an affirmation of you and what you're all about.
Yeah, yeah. What a great job you did. Here's an
Yeah.
extra prize, right? You already got paid for it. Like everything's already happened, but here's extra, right? Here's that's the quality that benefic quality.
Yeah. So, and with Demi Moore in particular, now she's favored as potentially the favorite actress to win the Academy Award at the Oscars for Best Actress. And it's interesting because she has Pisces rising. So this Venus retrograde, of course, is going to be going through her first house where it's the most prominent. And it was interesting. I love that because in the year ahead forecast, when I was trying to describe this Venus retrograde and how Venus will go retrograde in Pisces and then it will conjoin Saturn, I was talking about like a woman who was like exalted in status and was eminent, but who was successful despite struggling with issues related to like time or health or age or other topics like that. And that's like interestingly kind of similar to the theme of The Substance itself, the movie that she was in, which is very Venus retrograde. Um, and it was interesting how that ended up playing out there and will play out just during the course of seeing this award season and seeing this movie and seeing her become very prominent at this time for different reasons.
Yeah, nice. It's been on my list for about a month, and I haven't gotten around to it. I will definitely watch The Substance.
I think you will like it. I think you'll like
I
it a lot,
I saw
actually.
a review and I was like, I know I'm gonna like this.
Right. All right. So we'll return to that more, and I may do a whole separate episode on like the Oscars and the astrology because there's a lot of interesting stuff with different movies that are nominated that are all very, very Venus retrograde this year, including like The Substance, Honora, the musical that's getting so many awards. The lead actress in that has a interesting Sun Mercury conjunction on the degree that Venus will station. So I'll save that for another time. All right, moving on. Another major event that happened is former President Jimmy Carter died on December 29th, 2024. And this was really striking because this ended up being another Venus retrograde story, partially because he came into office in 1977 during the Venus retrograde in Aries and the buildup to that. So he ended up passing away then, basically, and then his funeral was held as Venus was again slowing down and preparing to go retrograde in Aries as one of those 8-year repetitions. So his funeral was held in early January, and the flag was actually at half staff during the inauguration this year due to his death, which is really striking. That imagery of being a Venus retrograde 8-year repetition and him coming into office when Venus was at that same place in 1977, and then having Venus recur and having the flag be at half staff after his passing away. Um, so it was not just that, but also some of the things that happened during his administration also started coming up and becoming relevant again in the news when Trump, for example, started talking about the Panama Canal, which was sold during the Carter administration back to Panama. So there's all these weird Venus retrograde repetitions happening right now in the news.
Yeah, yeah, you can see it coming. You can feel it coming too, but you can also see the evidence in the news feed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and Venus, I don't know if you saw it, but Venus reached its maximum elongation around January 10th, which is when it gets the furthest from the sun just before as it's preparing to station retrograde, and it gets the brightest. And it was just super bright. It's still pretty bright at this point, but it was really, really bright around the early to mid January, and it was conjunct Saturn in the sky. So you could see Venus as this really brilliant, like brightest star in the sky, and it was right next to this really dim star, which was Saturn.
Hmm. Yeah, there's been some good sky watching in January. That full moon with bright Mars. It was Mars at its brightest, right next to the moon at its brightest.
Right. All right, so moving on, the other major thing was TikTok's closure and temporary reopening. And I was paying attention to this partially because I decided to post my horoscopes on TikTok for the first time at the end of December and beginning of January, and they did really well. But that made it so that I was paying more attention to TikTok than I have at any time in the past. And one of the things I noticed is that the site was scheduled to close on the 19th of January. And as soon as the sun got within 10 degrees of a conjunction with Pluto, there was just this impending sense of doom and like dread that suddenly swept over that entire place when all of them realized that this was actually happening. And the Supreme Court issued a decision basically around that time that said they weren't going to stop it from closing. So it was really striking in the build up to that Sun Pluto conjunction, what the vibe was of like this thing could actually die, and different people who had put so many hundreds of hours and days of work into creating their profiles and videos there and having whole businesses based on it, having to face the possibility of losing that. It was really striking. And then on January 18th, it actually closed. And that was that night as it closed, the Venus Saturn conjunction actually went exact in Pisces in the sky, which was really striking to watch. But then the very next day, it reopened with a note thanking Donald Trump for helping to bring it back. But it turned out that once he got back into office, he signed an executive order to give it a 75-day extension. But he's asking for a lot. He's asking for like half of the company or something exorbitant like that. So it's not actually clear if they're going to work out a deal and if it's permanently back at this point. And it's actually not available in the Apple App Store. So people can't sign up for it. And if people deleted the app, which a lot of people apparently did when it closed, they can't get back into it. So there's these ongoing negotiations, and it's not really clear if it will be back for good. And what's interesting is that Venus is going to go retrograde, and the day that it stations, or not the day that it stations, but it's going to retrograde back and conjoin Saturn on the day that the 75-day extension ends, so that there's going to be this weird recurrence where Venus conjoins Saturn the first night it closed, and then Venus is going to be conjoining Saturn again when that second extension hits.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it also it makes a lot of sense that social networking, that these type of sites would answer to Venus, right? It's a network of people who are, it's inherently social, and therefore under Venus's dominion. There's a communicative, informational, mercurial part of it, but it's about people, right? And it's about connecting what you're doing to people. It's about, there's also a lot of trying to charm people or look cool or do something that entertains people, right? It's all very, it's all anchored very clearly in the Venusian sphere. And you have some history that suggests the same, where we have the fates of other social networks being sealed on crucial Venus moments as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally called social networking, as sites, and that social aspect of Venus is really important. So once I started paying attention to Venus retrograde stuff, and I saw that Venus Saturn conjunction, and I realized this was tied into the retrograde, I decided to look back 8 years earlier and see what happened. And it turned out that 8 years earlier, almost to the exact day, on January 17th, Vine closed, which was like the video precursor to TikTok where people could do vines, which were what were they? They were just like 5 seconds long or 10 seconds or something incredibly short of like short social media videos. But it was a huge phenomenon that a lot of younger people used and a lot of younger creators got their start doing video content in. That eventually TikTok was inspired by when it started a few years later and then became wildly successful by 2019 and 2020. So Vine was like the predecessor to TikTok, and it closed almost exactly 8 years to the day to when TikTok shut down initially. So that was one repetition, but then I decided to take it back further. And I was like, well, what happened 8 years before that in early 2009, the last time Venus was going retrograde in Aries and Pisces? And it turns out that that's when everybody was there was this mass exodus where everybody was leaving the most popular social network up to that point in the 2000s, which was MySpace, and they were all going over to Facebook. And MySpace was in an absolute free fall in early 2009. And it turned out in February of 2009, one of the co-founders stepped down from being CEO of MySpace, and he stuck around the board for another couple of months. But then 2 months later, in April of 2009, that co-founder plus the other co-founder, who was Tom, who was the famous Tom on MySpace, that was everybody's first, friend on MySpace that you were automatically assigned to. So everybody knew his name. He became like the most famous person for a period of several years when MySpace was huge. Tom and the other co-founder left the company in April of 2009 during that Venus retrograde. So basically, MySpace was falling apart as a similar repetition in 2009. If that wasn't enough, get this, 8 years earlier, the very first social networking site, which is called 6 Degrees of Separation, which introduced many of the basic concepts that we take for granted in social media today, it closed its doors on like December 30th, 2000, right before Venus went into Pisces and began the slowdown to the Venus retrograde period again in Aries during that year. So even the very first social networking site shut down under this same Venus retrograde.
Yeah, it's wild. Makes me wonder what it is about this particular retrograde, which was in those previous iterations almost entirely or entirely in Aries, that points to social media. Yeah, the I was sad when MySpace puttered out. I don't think I've been able to fully engage with another social media platform since.
Well, you and I met on MySpace, which is
Yeah,
what's funny.
MySpace
Like
was dude, I met Kate on MySpace.
your wife, okay, wow.
Yeah.
And you got your start writing on MySpace, like writing, or at least that's when you became famous. That's how I
Well,
first knew you,
that's
was
when
writing that blog.
anybody cared about what I wrote.
Right.
That was the
Okay.
first time anybody gave a shit. I'd written things before, but but yeah, no, that's that chronology is fucking amazing.
Well, what's funny is I want to take it back further because obviously there weren't social networking sites, but I wonder if there was like some news group or something 8 years before 2001, or if there was some like pen pal system, or maybe it goes back like hundreds of years and there was like some Stone Age like social networking site like thousands of years ago that this Venus retrograde's tied into.
Right, because the idea of a social or the phenomenon of a social network is not uniquely digital. It was made massive by means of that technology, but social networks are a thing.
Right. Yeah. Socializing, creating nets of social people. So, anyway, that's a whole thing. A bunch of TikTok users went to Red Note during the course of this, which is a Chinese social media platform. And there was all these news stories about this sudden like interaction of like people from the US and people from China, and this like cultural exchange that was suddenly going on during the course of the month, even once TikTok came back. And I thought that was interesting because that was one of two major tech stories really involving China this month that really centered on the Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius. And I think that's really important because of the important role Aquarius in the birth chart of China that we'll come back to and talk about later.
Mhm.
Before we get there, though, there was a bunch of international news that happened this month, right?
Yeah, there were several things, all of them on these Mars inflection points. The first one occurred the day that Mars regressed into Cancer, which in the chart of Canada is the 10th house. And Canada has both the sun and moon, along with Uranus, in Cancer in the 10th. And the 10th in a nation's chart is the place where you see leadership, whoever the prime minister, chief executive, president, whatever that chief role is called. And so, on the very day that Mars regressed into that space, Justin Trudeau announced his resignation. And so, I thought that was very striking, right? You have that trouble and the trouble that Mars brings, as well as a regress or like a plan to withdraw, to regress from that position. And you
Yeah.
found some interesting connections with his chart or his life and this Venus retrograde cycle as well.
Yeah, Nick and I talked about him a little bit in the Venus retrograde in Aries episode that this retrograde's important for him, but he's had some really challenging stuff come up in his life during this Venus retrograde in Aries, which is in his Justin Trudeau's eighth house where he has his moon. And one of the like early, really tough ones, one of the first ones for him is that his parents got a divorce, like this very public separation that was very publicized at the time during the Venus retrograde in Aries in 1977 when it retrograded across his moon basically, and his mom left and she was like touring with like the Rolling Stones or something like that. Nick had a whole story about it, and then I thought this one as a recurrence was interesting. So it's like he had that sort of traumatic, important early life event happen then of the breakup of his parents' marriage, but then in this one he had then a recurrence of this Venus retrograde that's about to happen in Aries in his eighth house and his seventh house. And I thought it was striking that part of the precipitating event that caused him to step down was that his finance minister resigned. And she was a really crucial player in terms of his administration and his coalition. So there might have been something tied in with that as well.
Yeah, interesting. I'd heard that, but don't pretend to know enough about Canadian politics to comment further.
Yeah, I pick up things sometimes, but that's often one of the issues of always meant to say of why we often focus on U.S. news better, because I always have this personal philosophy that I try to like not talk about things that I don't know much about as a general rule in my life. And I do my best to follow, I know a lot of US news and I try to follow some international news, but oftentimes we don't have as much coverage just because I don't like speaking about things I'm not knowledgeable about.
Yep, in the wise words of George Bush, I'm not an economist.
Right. Definitely. All right. There was another major piece of news internationally.
Yeah, well, we had a pair of things occur, important things of a very martial nature, occur on that Mars-Sun opposition on the 15th, which was right after the full moon, which is on the 13th. That like 12th through the 15th was just all Mars. And so the first was that the South Korean president, who had declared martial law on the Mars retrograde station in early December, was arrested on the Mars Sun opposition on the 14th, 15th. I think it was 14th in Korea, but it would have been 15th here, or South Korea. And so I understand it was a rather messy affair, but we just have like the two crucial events so far in that story: the declaration of martial law, which was immediately reversed on the station, and then that person's arrest on the dead center of the Mars retrograde. And so it's it couldn't be more literal or timed more perfectly with the Mars scandal.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it just goes to
Did I
show
say Mars scandal?
the Mars scandal. I mean,
The Mars cycle. I mean, Mars is full of scandal, but the Mars cycle is what I meant to say.
yeah, it just goes to show how the retrograde stations are tied in with the full solar phase cycle, and that the other important parts of the solar phase cycle are not just the retrograde station and the direct station, but you have the conjunction and the opposition like right in the middle of those.
Yeah, that opposition is really worth looking at. Its drama struck me some years ago, because again, it is the night where Mars is opposite the sun, just like the moon is when it's full, and so it's the brightest that Mars is, and Mars rises in the east in the same second as the sun sets in the west, and so just the actual astronomy of it is quite traumatic. In my little notes, I've tried to name it. I'm like, oh, it's Red Night or it's Crimson Night or whatever. Which, yeah, made me feel bad when that occurred and Los Angeles was burning down. I was like, oh, too
Yeah.
literal, too literal, too literal. Can we keep it? Can we keep it lyrical, Mars? Can Mars be about metaphorical fires and challenges? Can we do that? Can we
Yeah.
just do modern astrology for a little bit?
A little psychological. It's about
Yeah,
your inner child, stuff like
about
that.
your drive, right? The how you're aggressive. Yeah, your inner child's aggressive impulses.
Right. Um, Maybe we'll see. We'll circle back to that. So in other Sun Mars opposition news that happened around the same time, um, there was a Gaza ceasefire was announced on January 15th, and that was also basically the day of the Sun Mars opposition, halfway through the Mars retrograde cycle. So this whole thing is still unfolding, and there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding it still. But on one side, some hostages have been released, and then more recently, over the past few days, there's been these images and pictures and videos of Palestinians re-entering northern Gaza for the first time in 15 months since everything began. And I thought that might also tie things into the solar cycle, because I remember in like November of 2003, for example, talking about the Sun Mars conjunction in Scorpio that was happening at that time. So it was interesting here, so many months later, this happening at the Sun Mars opposition.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And other things, patron Sarah Hartshone noted that Mars was retrograde at 26 degrees of Cancer the day that the ceasefire deal was announced here in January, and that this ties back into where Mars was at 26 degrees of Libra on October 7th, 2023. So it was a close connection to that very degree, um, between these two dates of like the ceasefire deal and the original start of everything. And then apparently, she pointed out that even the ceasefire plan was originally posed by the Biden administration on May 31st, 2024, when Mars was at 23 degrees of Aries. So these degrees around 26 degrees of the cardinal sign seem to be really crucial for everything. And it's unclear if the deal will hold, but the first phase of the deal expires in early March when Venus stations retrograde in Aries.
Yeah. Well, at least some hostages have been released, right? There's some good at least that's come from the ceasefire, as I understand it.
Yeah, well, and
And
also
any good is
the
better than no
Venus,
good, maybe.
and also the Venus retrograde, and sometimes Venus retrograde can be like a return back to something. One of the ones that we saw in the 1945 Venus retrograde in Aries was there was this popular song during World War II about returning home, and like after being gone for a very long time, and it became super popular with all of like the American GIs that were fighting around the world and that were about to return home. And so here you have the same thing. On the one hand, you have hostages like returning home, but then you also have thousands of Palestinians returning back home to the north for the first time in 15 months. So maybe there's a similarity of themes there as well.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting.
Yeah. So moving on, Biden gave his farewell address on January 15th. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that in the Venus retrograde episode, that we recorded on January 10th, Nick and I talked about how President Eisenhower gave his farewell address in 1961, which is during the Venus retrograde in Aries, which this then was a recurrence of. And so, interestingly, Biden then, a few days later after we recorded that episode, he mentioned Eisenhower's famous farewell address and specifically how Eisenhower had warned of a quote unquote military industrial complex in his farewell address, which is like this famous remark that's been repeated a lot over the past 20 years. I remember it was talked about like a lot in the 2000s during like the second Iraq war that Bush initiated. So Biden invoked Eisenhower in his farewell address, and he used it to warn of what he called a quote unquote tech industrial complex. And he said, quote, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy. I thought that was so striking just because Eisenhower gave his farewell address on January 17th, 1961, when Venus was in Pisces, slowing down to retrograde in Aries. And then Biden gave his on January 15th, 2025, when Venus was in Pisces, slowing down to retrograde in Aries. Um, and also both had Mars retrograde in Cancer as well, because this is also a recurrence of planetary periods of Mars. So, in completely unrelated news, Trump had a line of tech billionaires at the inauguration that were sitting in front of his own cabinet. That was people like, Elon Musk, who's the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, who was, I think, one-time richest man in the world as the head of Amazon, Mark Zuckerberg as the head of Facebook, the head of Google was there in the same line of guys. There was a bunch of basically like richest tech billionaires in the world.
Yeah. I guess two quick things on that. One, I've often discussed when talking about Pluto's movement through signs, how Pluto gives a different face to the nightmarish, death-dealing force that it carries, and how how when it was Pluto in Scorpio in the 80s and early 90s, it was occult serial killers like Richard Ramirez, or excuse me, sex occult killer figures who were very popular then. And we've been talking about what face Pluto in Aquarius will wear, and I think evil tech plutocrat, right? Like as a figure, as as appropriate villain and source of anxiety and fear for Pluto and Aquarius is a pretty good match, right? Like it's the sort of Lex Luthor style villain. And I suppose on another note, it's almost refreshing to see the like the plutocracy out in the open, because it's not that this happened, in the last 6 months. Um, we've, United States has long been subject to quite undemocratic forces, and so it's shocking. It's shocking to see it so out in the open, and likely indicative or characteristic of the era that we're entering.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Pluto, one of the things I had been talking about for a long time with this was the first Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which
this is really important because it sets the stage for the next 20 years of Sun Pluto conjunctions in Aquarius. And that synodic cycle is very important because, just like we've been talking about the synodic cycle between the Sun and Venus, which results in like the Venus stations and conjunctions, or the Mars retrograde stations and conjunctions and oppositions with the Sun. This was the Sun and Pluto doing this for the very first time in this sign during this 20-year phase. So it was really setting the stage and planting the seeds for a lot of things that are going to develop over the next 20 years. And the inauguration and this thing with the tech billionaires taking this new, much more blatant role in terms of intermingling with politics and having powerful roles, sometimes like directly an influence over the executive branch and the government itself. This is a new phase of this. I think that's an escalation.
Yeah, well, and the simple symbolism of the sun with Pluto, like the sun is that which makes things visible. and to being able to see something as clearly as possible. And then also, I would add that we're unfortunately, probably unfortunately, very much on our continue to be on in the cyberpunk timeline, where wherein giant corporations and those that head them become huge players in some scenarios on the same scale or larger than nation states. Like that's part of every cyberpunk vision of what was in the 80s and 90s the near future, like the 2020s or 30s. And now that we're here, there's an unfortunate increasingly perfect match, for what it's worth. Like that's part of all those visions.
I mean, yeah, it's just weird because practically speaking, if you had told me that that was happening 10 years ago or something, I would say that's a little exaggerated. Like, surely it's not, things aren't going to be that bad, but like we're kind of there at this point, and this is the very beginning of Pluto and Aquarius. So it's striking. Let's keep moving through the news.
Sure.
So Trump was inaugurated on January 20th. It was moved inside due to the cold, due to a cold snap on the East Coast. And what was interesting is there's a Washington Post headline at the same time saying the last time this happened was 1985 during Reagan's second inauguration, which, guess what? Of course, was Venus slowing down to station retrograde in Aries. So it was another 8-year repetition of Venus when they moved everything inside due to the cold. So yeah, we had the tech billionaire thing that were sitting in front of his own cabinet, which was extraordinary as part of the Sun Pluto conjunction. But there was also something else. There was something I had researched and found in the Venus retrograde series that sometimes they coincide with a major comeback. Like Judy Garland, for example, in one of the 1950 Venus retrogrades in Aries, made this legendary major comeback performance under this Venus retrograde in Aries. And I realized that's part of what we saw here with Trump was this crazy comeback of him coming back into office at this time during this retrograde, exactly 8 years from the last time Venus was retrograde in this sign when he first came into office. And what was interesting is this has happened under other Venus retrogrades before, like Richard Nixon in 1969. He came into office under this Venus retrograde, and that was a major political comeback at the time as well because he had lost 8 years earlier during the previous retrograde to Kennedy. And Nixon lost to Kennedy, even though he was the sitting vice president at the time. And then he tried to run for like governor of California or something like a year or two later, and he lost that as well. So it looked like Nixon was just done politically, and even he thought so. But then somehow he was able to stage this major comeback and become president in 1969. So this is similar, and it was a good learning thing for me that sometimes Venus retrogrades are like a comeback, basically. And we've all experienced that in personal lives, partially because we think about Venus retrograde being like old relationships coming back into your life, but here sometimes it can be a political or like career revival of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
an honor or a confirmation, like we were talking about with awards.
Yeah. So there was also repetitions of like a vice president having to attend the inauguration after losing. That happened in 2001 with Gore during this Venus retrograde, as well as 1961 with Nixon. Even Hillary 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton having to attend in 2017 because she was the former first lady, was like part of that. And then of course you had Kamala Harris having to attend um, this inauguration. There was a comet that showed up and became visible in the days before the inauguration. It was Comet 2024 G3 Atlas. It became very bright after its closest pass to the sun on January 13th and developed this really striking tail. And I thought that was again notable that we keep seeing these comet things happening.
Yeah, it seems like there's a comet in attendance whenever anything important happens for, I don't know, the last 4 years now, 5 years.
well, the past year especially. I mean,
Oh, especially,
um,
but they've
in
been showing up.
in April, in October, right before the election, and then again right before the inauguration. So, in the inauguration speech, Trump kept talking about it being the beginning of a new golden age. And that really reminded me of the Emperor Augustus, because Augustus was the first Roman emperor, and he also presented his reign as a return to this mythical golden age. And since that's my like time period of like, I, Hellenistic astrology, I wrote the book on, it was really hard not hearing that and like seeing the connection, because Augustus also promised this period of peace and prosperity and harmony after Rome had just been through a civil war. And Augustus portrayed himself as this like divinely ordained leader who was bringing stability to Rome after this period of conflict. And what was weird is that a comet appeared during the funeral of Julius Caesar, who was his adopted father. So Augustus basically used that for political purposes or propaganda purposes to say his adopted father had been deified, and therefore by extension he was also a god as well. And that became the beginning of his reign, was that comet that appeared at that time, which is
Well, no,
crazy.
I mean the comma that appeared at Julius Caesar's funeral began years and years of vicious civil war in Rome that ended with Augustus as the victor. But there were years of brutal reprisals and multiple civil wars. So if that was an indicator of anything, it was the bloody years to come.
Right. And the beginning of that transition of power when the previous leader of Rome died and then Augustus began his rise.
Well, yeah, that's when the ill-fated triumvirate began.
Right. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. In the days before the inauguration, Trump launched this crypto coin just a few days before on like the 17th. And this is another Sun Pluto conjunction, like beginning of an era thing, because um, tons and tons of people bought this thing, and it became worth like billions and billions of dollars. And Trump and his close associates owned the majority of it. So he potentially made billions of dollars in a matter of days from this coin. Although it creates this interesting conflict of interest that I thought was interesting, because it invoked the beginning of Carter's presidency again during that same Venus retrograde in Aries, because Carter famously had to put his peanut farm in a trust during his presidency, and then later he eventually sold it because they're putting pressure on him, saying he had a conflict of interest, being president of the free world and having this farm where things could be influenced in some way. So there's an interesting repetition of that here, because it sort of creates a conflict of interest where Trump has billions of dollars worth of this coin now that's come off of him becoming president again, but also is enacting deregulation and other rules that will influence cryptocurrencies, including his own. It may also put him in the position of being able to be influenced financially by different foreign governments who could invest a bunch of money and pump up the value of the coin, or take money out, or other things like that. So it's weird seeing how much cryptocurrency has become a major hallmark of his presidency at the very beginning of this Pluto and Aquarius period.
Yeah, the inauguration taking place on that Sun Pluto conjunction is just anchoring all of these Pluto and Aquarius themes to it, like in a more in a more obvious way than I think we could have even guessed. Like the front row seating for the plutocrats, the launch of the coin, the crypto coin right beforehand. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
If somebody had
it's not
written
subtle.
this, if somebody wrote this as like a script, I would have told them to like tone it down, because it's like a
I'd
bit
be like, no,
much.
no, that takes place like 3 weeks later. Like that happens. That's part of the story, but like not all in episode two.
Right. You're like, no, Austin, this all happens the exact same day.
Yeah,
Because
no,
there's like,
that's implausible, right?
right.
We're stretching the audience's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So moving on, with Mars retrograding back into Cancer, one of the things we had talked about and anticipated that's actually come true now with Trump coming back into office, one of the first things he immediately began doing is rounding up immigrants and increasing. They've apparently there was news reporting yesterday that he's set quotas for ICE on how many um, immigrants, I guess that ICE officials have to detain. I'm not sure if that's per day or week or month or what have you, but it's like forcing them to start going out and like arresting people much more aggressively. There's all these videos of people being arrested and deported. This was foreshadowed in the fall when Mars went into Cancer, and then all of a sudden there were all those discussions about immigration and illegal
Mhm.
immigration, and Trump was saying even really absurd stuff about like immigrants eating cats and dogs in Ohio. That was when that whole thing was happening in Mars and Cancer. So in the year ahead forecast, it was obvious we sort of anticipated that when Mars came back into Cancer that this would be a major theme, and indeed it has been, and will probably continue to be, or I would say actually increase this month, especially around that Mars station in Cancer that's going to happen around mid to late February. It will probably be a major escalation or turning point with respect to this.
Yeah, or an inflection point. I think uh, the the theme around immigration is also pointed to by the ongoing upcoming Saturn Neptune conjunction, right? Saturn and Neptune being the two most opposed in terms of closed or open, fortress-like borders or completely permeable borders. And so I think that, yeah, the in addition to the Mars cycle, we also have that conjunction, which is ongoing and still upcoming, pointing to it and timing it as well, which would suggest that it would take that issue well into the next couple years.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how that goes. I do think there'll be a connection between the Mars station that happens around what is it like February 22nd, 23rd,
23rd.
and then a week later Venus stations. I feel like there's going to be some event that happens that sets off like a controversy, and it could be related to this topic, which then feeds into the Venus retrograde that sets it off like a week later. Because under Venus retrogrades, there's very commonly major protests that happen.
Hmm.
So I've been looking and trying to anticipate like what could happen at the Mars station on February 23rd that sets off like a wave of protests around the end of February and beginning of March, and it could be related to this. Um, that's at least one of the like vectors that I'm looking at. So since Mars is stationing in Cancer, and we know that
Hmm.
the Mars and Cancer transit has been very much tied in with uh, sometimes controversies and other things surrounding Trump's views on immigrants and immigration. So, related to that, Trump is also trying to get rid of birthright citizenship, and he issued an executive order attempting to make it so that people that are born in this country don't necessarily become citizens, which is basically a clause that's been with the country since the 14th Amendment that was passed after the Civil War back in the 1800s. And in the 14th Amendment, it basically makes it a law that if you're born in this country, then you become a citizen. So a federal judge blocked his executive order already on January 23rd, calling it quote unquote blatantly unconstitutional because it's in the 14th Amendment that if you're born here, you're a citizen. And I thought this was so fascinating because just astrologically and abstractly, at least, everything personal and moral and ethical aside, but we had talked about the 14th Amendment a year ago in the 2024 year ahead forecast in December of 2023, because I discovered the night before we recorded that forecast that there was this 79-year repetition of Mars where Mars would go retrograde in Cancer in roughly the same degrees every 79 years. And that the 14th Amendment was passed during a Mars retrograding Cancer year that is connected with this current cycle. And what was fascinating is like I was connecting that at the time with what was in the news, which was the 14th Amendment contained the insurrection clause that if you had fought against the government or participated in an insurrection that you couldn't run for public office, which was passed after the Civil War so that people that had fought against the Union basically couldn't run for office afterwards. But the other part of the 14th Amendment was this citizenship clause, basically the birthright citizenship clause. So that was passed in the 1800s after the Civil War. Then 79 years later was 1946, and that is the year that Trump was born. So he was born the year that Mars is retrograding Cancer as well. And his Mars is in Leo, but it's just coming
Mhm.
off of that Mars retrograding Cancer. And then 79 years after Trump was born is right now when Mars is again, retrograding Cancer. And so that law that came into being under Mars retrograding Cancer that gives people birthright citizenship is now under attack and potentially could be dissolved, although it seems unlikely he'll be able to pull that off, but he's gonna try at least,
Right,
evidently.
like being contested by someone born um, in that same cycle. Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, like I'm really getting into these um, retrogrades, but also planetary returns over long periods of time.
Mhm.
There's something very special there that I'm starting to uncover with that, and I'm pretty interested in it just abstractly as an astrologer.
Oh yeah.
All
When
right.
also on a birth timing level, right? Like the 79th year is you will do, or yeah, at the 79th year is when this person will do their Mars thing, right? Like that's the in a sense that's the Uber Mars return if you live that long. And so
Well,
like from a from a natal timing perspective.
because the other part of what I saw with it is that sometimes the destruction of something is built into its creation is one of the other things that I'm working on, because this is what happened with the bridge thing last year. Is that was a 47-year Mars repetition where it had this difficult Mars thing built into its birth chart when the bridge was built, and then when the Mars period returned and completed after 47 years, the bridge collapsed suddenly. So that it's
Hmm.
like if there's weaknesses in something structurally, when that activation takes place, it could crumble, which is interesting because it takes it back to the old ancient length of life rules. Remember,
Right.
where a person's supposed to live as long as the planetary period. So anyway,
Right.
sidetrack.
Each planet allots a lifespan using these numbers, and then
I
you
think
modify that with aspects to it.
what's interesting though about those years is the ones that are handed down in the tradition have like no astronomical relevance or anything whatsoever. And I think somebody messed some, like seriously fucked something up during the transmission, because these are the ones that do, and they come from the earlier strata of the tradition, like the
Hmm.
79 years of Mars. And I think these might be the true numbers that are supposed to be associated with those length of life calculations.
Oh,
Um, and
100%.
and somebody messed something up because the other numbers that have been with the tradition for 100 years now, or 2,000 years now, don't have hardly any astronomical basis. So that's another angle I'm working there.
Yeah, that seems quite likely to me. Or if the other numbers are relevant, maybe they're these larger cycles, these great cycles, but minus 12 because of a reason. But these larger planetary periods have to be the basis for the length of life that each planet gives.
Right.
It seems
Yeah.
unthinkable otherwise. But yeah, keep me posted.
I'll get back to you on that. All right, moving on. There's a lot of other news that happened with Trump, but there's too much to cover. These are just the ones I found that were the most compelling astrologically, especially because many of them tie back in with things we've discussed already in previous episodes. So we'll continue to cover other stuff as it unfolds in the future. Other news quickly, on January 21st, which is also right on the Sun Pluto conjunction, there was this $500 billion private sector investment announced in AI infrastructure. That was a joint venture called Stargate that involved the founder of OpenAI and ChatGPT, Sam Altman, who made an announcement at the White House that day. And apparently, they're going to use this to build these massive data centers, and they've already started building them in Texas. And then the other part of it is they're also going to be putting huge amounts of money into power and electricity, because I was reading that AI data centers could reach up to using 10% of US electricity by 2030, and it's only at like 2% or 3% or something right now. So we're just talking about massive amounts of power and energy that are going to be pumped into these data centers, which is also, as I discussed in the year ahead forecast, causing everyone to start moving towards using nuclear energy again all of a sudden out of nowhere. And also on this conjunction, Trump immediately revoked Biden's executive order that was addressing AI risks, basically, that was trying to put some guardrails and regulations and like safety protocols in place for all this crazy AI stuff. And Trump revoked that order basically, so that all of this stuff is just going to move very rapidly at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's made me revise my thinking about what to title this period of this maybe 8 year period of history that we've just entered. My unserious title for it was Cyberpunk Clown Mageddon, and I feel like that's moving up the ranks. I feel like Cyberpunk Clown Mageddon is becoming a more accurate descriptor than some of the other more dignified phrases that I proposed.
I like that. That is better. Uh,
More
clown,
descriptive. We'll see.
clown Mageddon. All right. Um, so moving on really quickly to finish up my last piece of news. The latest thing that happened is that there's this new AI that was just rolled out by a Chinese company called DeepSeek that completely surprised everybody this week. And what was really striking about this is that DeepSeek R1, the new AI model, was released on January 20th. They released it like right on the day of the inauguration, but also on the Sun Pluto conjunction. And it was by this Chinese AI company. And what surprised and shocked everybody, all the news right now, especially over the past few days, has been talking about this being like a shocking and surprising event that's completely shaken things up. And I think it's because Uranus is stationing direct in Taurus right now over the next few days. So what we're experiencing is the Uranus station and the surprise and upset of that. So what was surprising about this new Chinese AI model is that it surpassed the most recent AI model by OpenAI, which is one of the leading AI companies that makes ChatGPT. The other thing about it is that it's fully open source and it's much, much cheaper than Western AI models. So this came as a huge surprise to everyone because the conventional wisdom was that Chinese AI companies were a year or so behind American companies, partially because the Biden administration had put export controls on hardware that's used for AI development and computations. He put export controls that it couldn't be exported to China, basically, in order to keep the American advantage over AI, I guess, as part of that attempt. But what happened is this came out. It turns out that the Chinese AI companies are way further ahead than the Western companies expected. And this AI app is so good that it immediately shot to the number one of the app stores. And it's the number one app in the Apple App Store right now, moving ahead of OpenAI's ChatGPT. And what happened is this news really built up over the past few days. Today is Tuesday, the 28th. And as soon as the markets opened on Monday, the all of the tech stocks just plummeted and crashed. And Nvidia in particular lost 600 billion market cap, which was the largest single day loss in US history for a company like that. And Uranus stations in Taurus on January 30th. And you have people using these keywords like quote unquote unexpected, rattling the industry, and a classic disruption story. So I thought that was incredible.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, in that yeah, um that 10 days between the Sun Pluto conjunction and Uranus's station.
Right. So I thought it was interesting that there's then, because that means that there were two major Chinese companies that came up in major ways this month around the Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, the first Sun Pluto conjunction in that sign. And I think this is because Pluto and Aquarius, when I did a year ago the deep dive with Nick Diggin Best on Pluto and Aquarius in history, we kept seeing China come up as a country with technological innovations every time Pluto was in Aquarius over the past 2,000 years. And I think we're seeing a recurrence of that now. And I think this is due to Aquarius being prominent in some very early base chart in China from thousands of years ago that's probably been lost. But even without knowing what chart that is, I think even more recently, the current chart for China, which is set for like October of 1959, or maybe it's 49, it has the ascendant at 1 degree of Aquarius and the moon at 3 degrees of Aquarius. So it already has, like, the current government's chart for China has Aquarius very prominent. And I think that's why this Sun Pluto conjunction at 1 and 2 degrees of Aquarius this year was so crucial. But it also is just the beginning of like 20 years of Sun Pluto conjunctions in that sign. And this is the beginning of a very long AI tech race between the US and China that's going to play out over the course of the next 2 decades.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good catch. It makes me want to look back at my Pluto and Aquarius and China research because I went back quite a ways and I can't recall it all right now.
Yeah, well, a lot of mine was about gunpowder. Like, gunpowder was the huge recurring thing that developed
Hmm.
in China, like, slowly over the years, and then eventually was exported to the West. Or you had like the silkworms and how China developed that, but tried to keep it, private. But then eventually, like, the West sent spies to like steal the silkworms and were able to be successful in like getting some, so that they then created their own silk industry. So the whole idea of international espionage as part of this is going to be a
Hmm.
thing as well.
Hmm.
Anyway, thank you for. There's so many news stories. I want to cover so many. That's all we have time for today. I'm going to do a follow up on Venus retrograde repetitions in the news, probably in early February, because there's a bunch of interesting ones. But I think that's good for the news. Yeah.
I think so.
Cool. All right. Let's take a little break. If you're looking to study astrology more deeply, then check out my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures that are unique to the course, and there's also a monthly webinar and Q&A session, and at the end of the course you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me. Find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. All right, let's transition to talking about the astrology of February at this point. I want to start by first showing the February astrology calendar again, just to give you a quick preview again of some of the major transits and alignments this month. Um, so, in terms of where to start, one of the things I want to mention, because I already mentioned this in the news section, but Uranus is going to station basically a day or two after we release this forecast. It's stationing on January 30th at 23 degrees of Taurus. And this is really important because this is one of the last stations in Taurus, and Uranus is going to zoom into Gemini in July of this year after this. But I think this is important because we've already seen some major shakeups and things in the news, but there may be more to come in the next few days. So I want to make sure we don't overlook or not emphasize that energy, especially because it's tied in with the new moon in Aquarius on January 29th that kind of sets the tone for the opening of February as well.
Yeah, February opens sort of in the wake of Uranus's destabilizing station, and it being a direct station. Like you said, it's the beginning of Uranus's march into Gemini, which won't happen until excuse me, until July. But it's forward from this point. It's headed towards that with no interruptions. And so, yeah, like that. It's not just the same old Uranus in Taurus. And so those vibrations are happening. We also have just had the nodes, the eclipse points, move the head and tail of the dragon, change signs. There are two calculations, one being the mean node, which changed basically today, and then the so-called true node having switched about 2 weeks ago. And so this is very important, not only because the nodes spend about a year and a half in a given pair of signs. So, they last longer in their pair of signs than Jupiter does in a sign, but because this change has occurred just in time for the North Node to join Neptune and Saturn at the end of Pisces. And not only is that significant in and of itself, but we'll be spending half-ish of the Venus retrograde with Venus in Pisces with Neptune and Saturn and the North Node. And so this is an extremely important addition to the astrology of the next several months. This is, the show could not happen the way it will without the North Node moving into the end of Pisces.
Yeah, because the nodes in ancient astrology are referred to as the eclipsing places, and they tell you where eclipses are going to happen. And we've already had one eclipse in Pisces back in September that kind of opened that series. But we're going to have the next eclipse in that series happen in Virgo now that the nodes are in those two signs in Pisces and Virgo coming up here in March, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then on to a full set of Pisces Virgo eclipses during the second half of the year. And the nodes, of course, also act. The nodes are also meaningful transiting points when even if there's not an eclipse occurring, if the North Node is conjoined something exactly in your chart, that matters. I remember years ago, I was debating with myself, whether the nodes mattered when eclipses weren't happening. And I looked back at a period of time where I decided, really without warning, to stop writing my annual almanac. Right, I did like an annual almanac for 5 years in a row, where I wrote about every day, every month, every major ingress, et cetera, et cetera. It was a big project, and one year I was like, you know what? I'm not fucking doing it. Just before I was due to begin, it took me about a quarter, and I look back at that, and the South Node was conjoined my Mercury in the 10th house, suggesting a profession involved with creating words. The South Node was conjunct my Mercury by degree when I'd made that decision. There were no
Mm.
eclipses. There weren't eclipses for several months on either side, but it convinced me that the exact conjunctions from the nodes mattered quite a bit, even when eclipses weren't occurring.
Yeah, person, I had a South Node conjunction with a planet in the 11th, and just like a friendship that ceased to be as prominent in my life at one point when I had a transit like that. So that was a similar thing where it also showed me that sometimes the South Node really can indicate a decrease of something.
Yeah, there's often it just sort of yeah, like there's often a fadeaway. I remember being kind of shocked at how quickly I just dropped a giant project. Like I don't do that. I usually persist way too long. Um,
Right. Like an eclipsing, a hiding,
yeah,
fading away.
it's just not like the sun or the moon's light. It's just not there, right? It's just not there anymore.
Right.
Um,
This is Pisces, and that's where the South Node's going to be, and then the North
North Node.
Node's in Aries. Go
North
ahead.
Node is entering Pisces, and the South Node is entering Virgo.
Right. Sorry, I've reversed them in my mind. I was just thinking about because the other thing that's happening that happens at the very end of January, but we open February with, is that Venus has moved into its shadow degrees, where on January 28th, Venus passes 24 degrees of Pisces, which is the degree that it will later retrograde back to and station direct at all the way in like April. So that means we've also not just entered the like pre retrograde when Venus moved into Pisces on January 2nd, which is like the sign it will retrograde back into, but on January 28th, we've officially entered the range of degrees in Pisces that Venus is going to actually return to, which are the sensitive degrees for people if they have, especially planets in the last decan of Pisces or the first decan of Aries.
Yeah, and if we look at the chart of February 1st, we actually see Venus conjunct the North Node, conjunct Neptune with Saturn there, and the moon's on top of it. And so, like February, the very first day of February actually looks like the end of March. We have the same thing that's going to recur. It's that like that's not all that's not all of the, let's call it, chaos, excitement, chaos, drama, etc., that March and April will bring, but those are a lot of the players, the North Node, Neptune, Saturn, and Venus. And Leading up to that, we get the exact conjunction of Neptune and the North Node, and we get one exact conjunction between the North Node and Saturn. And I found, as I was telling you earlier, I accidentally stumbled on a really perfect Saturn North Node thing just earlier today. I'd seen Nosferatu the other night, which was fantastic. Loved it. Great, um, deep, deep, masterful sort of revisiting of a classic piece of cinema. Love Dave Eggers. Um, but I was curious about the astrology of it, and I was hoping that maybe it was a Saturn and Pisces thing, because Nosferatu had been originally released in the 20s, and then there had been a Werner Herzog version that was released in the 70s, and I didn't remember the dates. And so I was like, well, you get a lot of sort of classics of imagination that occur when Saturn's in Pisces. Maybe this is one of those. And it wasn't that, but what I did find is that all three versions of Nosferatu have a Saturn North Node or Saturn Rahu conjunction, and you just can't do better as far as symbolism is concerned. Saturn is that which is ancient or decaying, like Count Orlok, the vampire in Nosferatu. He's ancient, he's kind of dead, he's kind of alive. He is, many in many ways the cinematic introduction to the category of the undead in horror cinema. And then, unlike most people that are dead, the vampire, the Nosferatu, is extremely hungry, right? And this is a very consistent feature of the North Node. North Node, which is often also called the dragon's head, and the head is where the mouth is. And so there's often an endless hunger, which looks like an obsession, can be ambition, can be directed in more and less constructive ways, but you have this hunger for something wherever the North Node is. And so you have the hungry undead with Rahu plus Saturn, and it's just kind of right there. And so it's Saturn Rahu in different signs, but it's always Saturn Rahu with Nosferatu.
That day, we basically opened that day with a Venus Neptune conjunction, which is
Yeah.
also conjunct the node. And I think this is important because normally that would just be a quick aspect that would come and go over the course of the day and it would be done. But because Venus will hit Neptune once and then it'll go retrograde, it'll come back and hit Neptune two more times. So sometimes Venus retrogrades, relationship stuff can come up in a person's personal life. There can be like new people that come into your life or new relationships at that time. There can be old relationships that come back from the past. And I think one of the initial experiences of this first hit at the beginning of February could be like something looking really good on the surface, or somebody coming into your life, or somebody coming back into your life where you have this really idealized like picture of things where it seems like picturesque or like a movie, and it almost seems like too good to be true. But then during the course of the Venus retrograde, you may have to revisit that initial connection or reconnection to see if it was exactly like all it was cracked up to be, or if it was as good as it seemed at first, especially because Venus, after passing over Neptune the second time, will slow down and station direct conjunct Saturn, which could bring a sense of realism, a sense of maybe the reality of things being a little different than what you thought at first, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth noting that with that North Node combination with Neptune makes the fantasies that are present stickier, more entrancing, more easily. Yeah, like they tend to ensnare with the North Node with Neptune. There's that boosting quality, and again, there's a hunger with the North Node, which could show with Neptune North Node that there's like a hunger for the fantasy that makes us, or the vision, the dream, right? I like dream because dream is a little bit more neutral than fantasy, but can be a nightmare. but it might be a hunger for a particular dream that makes us vulnerable to it, or the dream itself might be somewhat ravenous. I'd been meaning, yeah, hypnotic from Marie Masco in the comments is a nice way to put it. Entrancing, fascinating, right? Um, and I'd spent a little time um, researching North Node Neptune conjunctions, but unfortunately wasn't able to go deep yet. I have one example that I think is really interesting, and so it's a roughly 17-year cycle, and the last time we had a North Node Rahu conjunction was during 2008. It was during the Northern Hemisphere's spring of 2008, and it's timed almost exactly to the point that Barack Obama becomes the clear victor of the Democratic primaries. And I was really struck by that because there was, the huge part of Obama's campaign was the hope and change, and that was, being an adult back then. I remember, I don't know, should we say how powerful that dream was. Obviously, it was powerful enough to win the United States presidency, but it made me reflect that so the a Neptunian dream on a large scale is almost always going to involve hope as part of the slogan, but this was Neptune Rahu conjoined in Aquarius, right? So it was hope and change, right? Aquarius wants a different and better future, and I have the dates written down for other iterations, but I wasn't able to get further than that. Nonetheless, I thought that was a pretty strong instance. And it's also important to note that North Node Neptune conjunction was in the first house of Barack Obama's chart, right? So he's very where he has Jupiter, so he's very well suited to carry that banner.
Right. And that was back when that election happened, when Uranus was in Pisces opposing Saturn in Virgo, and that was part of
Mhm.
the change theme as well, because he ended up being the change candidate, especially when um, pitted against 8 years of Bush up to that point, but also John McCain, who was pretty old at that point, being
Mhm.
his opponent in that election. And I think the Uranus Saturn opposition went exact on election day or something like that.
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. It was but like that, it was, like this the substance of the camp, or excuse me, the yeah, like the symbol of the campaign, which was very iconic.
The
w-
hope part,
yeah, like the
yeah.
hope and change, and had that image of him, and I was like, oh yeah, that is a North Node boosted Neptune dream.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense, especially for the hope part. I was just bringing in the Uranus opposition as being part of the change part.
Yeah, I
Um,
think
I want,
Aquarius likes change in of itself, but the ruler of Aquarius being opposite Uranus like locks that in.
mm, right. Before we move on completely, because I didn't want to transition away from it earlier completely before giving some keywords, the Uranus station at the end of the month, because it's on the last day of January and bleeds over into the first few days of February, I think we should give some keywords for that, like unexpected disruptions, shakeups, something that comes out of left field. One of the things I noticed that just came out actually that may be related to it is that late last night, Trump issued a memo that halted all federal spending, and supposedly it's pending reviews that the money doesn't go into things like DEI or the environment or other things that he doesn't like politically. And I have some quotes from a article. It said experts said the memo was poised to bring a rapid halt to scores of federal functions, from assistance to homeless shelters to financial aid for college students. Um, Trump's nominee to lead the budget office has vowed to try to move power over spending from Congress to the executive branch. And I think that's part of the key thing here, because that was what I talked about in the year ahead forecast of the Sun Pluto conjunction on Inauguration Day, is that was about that spoke to me symbolically about the attempt to accumulate power, more power in the executive branch and the presidency than there had been in the past. Here,
Mhm.
usually Congress is the one that allocates funding, but Trump is trying to move that power, the power for funding federal things, to his own office to the White House, essentially. Um, so yeah, I think that could be one of the things is depending on how that plays out, or if it gets stayed by a federal judge, that could be an unexpected disruption financially for like a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense with Uranus, right? The like Uranus in Taurus, like disrupting flows of capital, like expecting the funding to be there for something and then suddenly it's not there. And outside of that particular example, there may also other people may also experience, oh, there's no, we don't have the money to do that. Oh no, there is the money to do that because Uranus is though always disruptive, sometimes delights with a surprise. Sometimes it's something out of nothing, and sometimes it's something into nothing.
Hmm. Right. So, and that happened yesterday. The stock market, all the stocks tanked because there was this sudden like news that this new AI came out of nowhere and disrupted
Mhm.
all the expected things about AI. Um, in our, that's going to be also personally relevant for Trump and Vance, who both have their midheaven around those degrees of Taurus.
Hmm.
So having Uranus like stationing on the degree of your midheaven, and we remember back last summer with the Mars Uranus conjunction, that was actually when he picked Vance, like the day of that conjunction, around the time of their shared midheaven. But then there was also like that unexpectedly violent incident in Pennsylvania at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Uranus station and the disruptiveness and unexpectedness, but also rapid pace and developments happening as part of the opening of the month. Um, in terms of electional astrology, I did want to mention that February 1st is actually, when we looked at the electional astrology this month, in my opinion, it's the best date uh, of February for launching new ventures and undertakings using the principles of electional astrology. So I just wanted to give my best chart for the month real quick. The chart for the month is going to be February 1st, and there's a few different rising signs because February 1st is actually such a good day this month that there's three different options for rising signs, but I'm going to give the two primary ones. So the first one is February 1st around 11:30 in the morning, 11:30 a.m. local time. So that's 11:30 here in Denver, but it also basically should be roughly 11:30 in your location, whatever city you're in the world. Just set it for 11:30 in your location. And the chart I'm shooting for, you should adjust it until the ascendant's in late Taurus. So if you do this, what you end up with is a chart with Taurus rising, and the ruler of the ascendant is Venus, which is exalted in Pisces in the 11th whole sign house. And the moon is also in Pisces, where it's applying to a conjunction with Venus most of the first part of the day in most time zones. So this is a very 11th house focused chart, which is good for friends and groups and social movements and other things like that, with the ruler of the ascendant exalted. It also has Jupiter in the second whole sign house in a day chart, which is pretty good for financial things. And the ruler of the second house is Mercury, which is up there in Aquarius, applying to a trine with Jupiter with reception. So it's creating some good connections there with second house financial things and 10th house career and reputation things. Yeah, and it's just a pretty solid chart. There's some challenging things with short distance travel and communication, potentially with Mars in the third house being a little bit more combative. So that's option number one for rising signs, especially if you need your chart to be more focused on the 11th house of friends and groups and the second house of finances. Alternatively, another good chart is an hour later at about 12:30 p.m. local time. So this chart should give Gemini rising, and you should adjust it until the ascendant is around 11 degrees of Gemini so that Jupiter is right on the degree of the ascendant. So this is an excellent chart that brings that positive Jupiter, which is slowing down and getting ready to station direct. Jupiter's only 2 days from stationing direct, so it's practically direct at this point. And this chart makes Mercury the ruler of the ascendant, and it's placed in the ninth whole sign house, which is the place of education, foreign travel, religion, spirituality, beliefs, politics, publishing, and other things like that. And Mercury is applying to a trine with Jupiter with reception, which is creating a very positive connection between the first house Jupiter and the ninth house Mercury. This chart moves the moon Venus conjunction in Pisces to the 10th house, which is still pretty solid. The only downside is that Mars has moved to the second house of finances, so it's not as good for financial matters as a result of Mars being retrograde in Cancer in the second house, but otherwise good for first and ninth house activities. Yeah, so those are the primary charts for this month. In terms of electional astrology and in terms of launching things, Lisa Scheim and I are getting ready to record our electional astrology podcast for February, where we're going to go through the rest of the month and highlight at least 5, maybe 6, 7 other auspicious charts during the course of February and later dates for our electional astrology podcast, which you can get access to through our page at patreon.com/astrology podcast on the electional astrology tier. And if you're looking for dates that are further ahead in the year, we also still have our 2025 electional report where we looked at the entire year ahead and we picked out the single best chart for every month over the course of 2025 if you're looking for planning dates like this summer or later in 2025 or so on and so on and so forth. So you can get that report at theastrologypodcast.com/2025 report. All right, so that is our election for the month, which is right at the beginning of February. Let's keep it moving. Let's move to February 4th, where we have a big day because we have 2 benefic ingresses that take place already on February 4th, where Venus, which we started the month with Venus in late Pisces, as we've seen, Venus moves into Aries on the 4th, which is the sign that it's going to retrograde in. And the same exact day, Jupiter stations direct in the sign of Gemini, which is the last time it will station in that sign before it zooms through the rest of it and enters Cancer later this year in June.
Yeah, it's a fun pair of ingresses. It's a fun ingress and station. Jupiter is, I think, less complicated than Venus. Do you want to talk about Venus or Jupiter first?
Let's talk about Jupiter because Jupiter's shorter, and then
Yeah.
Venus will take us back into the whole retrograde thing.
So yeah, Jupiter's direct station is nice in the sense that when Jupiter's direct, it tends to offer reward and opportunity. The retrograde phase of Jupiter is often crucial for following up on, making good on, like locking in an opportunity for like growth, expansion, a project, personal improvement or whatever. But it's the direct phases where we tend to experience the actual reward rather than the fight to retain it or to follow up on it. And so, not only is Jupiter entering a more positive phase, but it does so in a near perfect trine with its ruler at this point, right? Which is in Gemini, the ruler is Mercury, and Mercury is only 1 degree away from a perfect trine, very much enabling like a rapid positive turn for that sector of Gemini. Jupiter does still have to make its third and final square with Saturn, but it won't actually do that until it leaves the sign of Gemini. And so any of the positive developments that people have been experiencing while Jupiter is in Gemini are set to get back on track and begin moving forward probably quite rapidly. Some of the projects or things that were going well for a while, but kind of slowed down, and there hasn't been as much progress over the last 4 months, are likely to jump jump back into swift motion. It's just it's a happy about face. Like, oh, these things can move forward again. Like, oh, like all those annoying changes we had to do to make things better are actually paying off, and now we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, especially it probably refers back to something when Jupiter stationed over the fall. That would have been when the sun was in Libra. So, what we're talking about, maybe like September, October, when Jupiter stationed retrograde in Gemini.
Yeah, yeah, that's it would have been early fall like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, this is going to be a hugely important turning point because Jupiter went into Gemini back in like the May timeframe of last year of 2024, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we had that whole pile up, a stellium of planets in Gemini. And for a lot of people, in terms of like your personal life, usually that's a period of growth and expansion when it comes to whatever house, whole sign house Jupiter is just ingressed into your chart. So that's been going on since last May. But usually at the retrograde station, you run into some issues with that, or there's some slowdowns or obstacles that come up back in like September. And at this point, when Jupiter stations direct, usually a lot of that gets worked out and things start moving forward again. And there's this sudden like burst of typically, especially if you have a day chart, like positive things happening in that area of your life that matches the house that Jupiter is transiting through. And whatever that transit's supposed to be about for you usually gets delivered very rapidly over the course of like a few days, where Jupiter suddenly the volume gets turned up and it becomes very loud. So I think that's going to happen in people's personal lives. It's also going to happen in world events because we've seen a lot of this stuff with artificial intelligence being incorporated into a voice component where there was all these voice AI apps that came out over the past year. I think there's going to be something related to that, something related to voice, to language, to translation, like live translation and communication that happens around this time in early February, not just because of Jupiter's stationing, but also because of that nice trine from Mercury at the same time from Aquarius.
Yeah, and it's only a few days later, on the 6th, that the moon conjoins newly stationed Jupiter. So,
Nice. And I showed you that AI like voice thing like the other day, where I was like talking to the AI and you could just like rapidly talk back and forth to it, right?
yeah, it
So
was
did
called
that
Gemini,
seem?
right?
Yeah, it's literally called Gemini, like Google Gemini. And OpenAI has their version as well, but there's just something incredibly striking about that you can have little quick back and forth conversations with the artificial intelligence at this point to tell you things in a way that's different somehow compared to before, where you could use voice to just like Google like a short question or something like that. There's a conversational component of language that's been incorporated here that's different and unique in some way.
Yeah, it is an unprecedented development.
Yeah. Um, all right. So that's probably like relatively positive that February 4th date with those two benefic activations happening at the same time. Um,
Venus is a little bit more complicated. I don't know that.
it is more complicated.
Yeah, because it's one, Venus is moving from sign of exaltation, Pisces, into a place that's harder for Venus, right? Like the in exile, in detriment. Aries is a harsher, gruffer, more direct place. There's not as much appreciation for artistry or subtlety, and relationships are often tested via conflict. The heat gets turned up. Just not to say there's nothing to enjoy with Venus in Aries, but it is traditionally a harder place to be. And not only is Aries a harder place to be, but Venus is getting increasingly close to the retrograde station. Venus is getting slower and slower and slower, and so what we see in Venus's sphere as Venus moves into Aries um, is going to be complicated. What gets brought up is increasingly complicated and not as we get close to a planet's retrograde station, this area that's going to be crossed 3 times, it means that like those subjects are going to need 3 passes to understand or unpack, and so things get complicated. Where like what it looks like at first, or at the first layer is, it conceals other things. Um, so
Right.
yeah, it's important. It's interesting. You should pay attention. The both the positive feelings and excitements, as well as the anger that comes up, the frustration, right? Those Mars Venus feelings. Um, the frustrated passions, anger, et cetera. Like all that stuff's it's coming up as soon as Venus goes into Aries.
Yeah, that's going to be a definite vibe shift on February 4th. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's going to last for such a long time since Venus just stays in Aries all the way until March 27th once it gets in there. Um, and you brought up how Venus in Aries is like opposite to its own sign, to its domicile, and how that can be somewhat awkward or different for Venus at first. And then even Venus going retrograde, also part of the symbolism of that is doing something that goes against the grain or something that's unconventional or something that Venus doesn't typically do, so that you get both of those senses of Venus being like a little bit out of place in some way. But that out of placeness doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but instead, sometimes with like Venus in Aries, you just get Venus doing things that Mars usually does. And so you get like a more direct Venus. You get a more abrupt or sometimes confrontational Venus that likes to go quicker and do things at a more fast pace. And sometimes that can be a little jarring at first, but some people do very well with that Venus and Aries placement.
Yeah, it's in a sense, whenever I look at Venus in a particular place, it's like well, what is there to enjoy here, right? Like what is the aesthetic of this place? What is beautiful? What kind of relationships are there to be had? And Aries, especially the first portion of Aries, it's very kinetic. It's at times it can be brutally direct, sometimes violent. And when you look at people with Venus, famous people with Venus, and non-famous people with Venus and Aries, um, there's when they have a strongly Venusian nature, you have sort of the quality of yeah, I guess people call it a bombshell, right? When someone's presence and appearance disrupts everything that's going on. One famous example being Marilyn Monroe, right? Whose presence, as a bombshell, like destroyed the room she entered. We also have Jack Nicholson, um, who is violently charismatic. And so you also have sort of
Lady Gaga.
okay, Lady Gaga. You
Yeah.
also have that cheering, how should we say, cheering for one side of a contest or being swept up in a conflict, right? Which is half of the enjoyment of fandom in sports and increasingly politics. The like enjoying, like watching the struggle unfold, right? Is like, it's you, yeah, like that, like that's what they're, it's another, yeah, I don't know. I often think of Aries as being a place where gladiatorial matches happen, right? And there's such high drama and passion. It may not be a classically Venusian environment, and it's not, how should I say, it's not an art museum, but there's still quite a bit of drama and beauty and dramatic moments. But it's not, I guess, what it's not that Venus often brings is direct, and in a traditional sign or a place of traditional dignity, Venus tends to bring peace, which is not the case at all during Venus retrograde phases or leading up to them, and it's also certainly not what we see in Aries.
Yeah, Venus in Aries, especially retrograde, doesn't take shit from anyone. And oftentimes there's these protests, especially like women's protests, start happening under these Venus retrogrades. Like 8 years ago, it was the women's protests after Trump was inaugurated, which were the largest protests at the time in U.S. history, up until 3 years later when Venus went retrograde again in Gemini, and then that was the George Floyd protests. But even going back in history, in 1913, when Venus was retrograde in Aries, the suffragists held these huge protests to get the women's right to vote. And then 8 years later, um, was right after they got the right to vote, and women, the first Congress that women had been able to vote in, the first official like election that women were able to vote in 1920, at the end of 1920, that Congress came into effect in early 1921 when Venus was retrograde in Aries, and started actually passing laws, including some really positive ones for women's healthcare.
Yeah, yeah, perfect, perfect. And so on a like personal watching your astrology note, you don't have to wait until Venus is retrograde in Aries to see and feel this coming.
Yeah.
Like this stuff should be popping up and trying to desperately to get your attention early in the month. I feel like there's once you start paying attention to the astrology, there's no excuse for being surprised by the Venus retrograde. Like it's going to spend all month, all of February, introducing itself to you, and this movement into Aries on the 4th should how should we say should be a particularly unsubtle moment.
Yeah, it's going to start getting really loud as soon as it goes into Aries, and then it'll reach peak loudness once it actually stations retrograde on March 1st through April 12th. But you can already see it coming a mile away, and people can look back 8 years ago and understand whatever was going on back then may give you some preview in early 2017 of some of the themes that are going to come up now, or you can go 8 years before that to early 2009, and that may be some of the themes, especially if you see a recurrence. I'm noticing people that have placements in early Aries or late Pisces seem to be the ones most impacted by this retrograde, because Venus will actually go over those degrees. And like Lady Gaga was one I found where she really exploded on the scene during this Venus retrograde in early 2009. And it turns out it's because she has her sun in early Aries, as well as placements in late Pisces, like her Mercury's in like mid to late Pisces. So people with Aries and Pisces placements are going to be the most affected by this. But the Venus retrograde is not usually a singular event, but instead it's like a series of events that unfolds over a period of time. And for many of us, the build up to that has already begun.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a significant period, which we'll probably be talking about for the next 2 months straight.
Right. Um, are there any other things you want to mention about it, about like going back and revisiting old relationships, revising or rebalancing current relationships? It can often be a turning point within a current relationship or with something going on in your partner's life.
Yeah, I think that I mean those are all relevant things. This leading into the Venus retrograde, I find that people get it's almost like some of these topics, like how things are in your current relationship or with your current relationship status. If you're with someone or if you're not with something, there's like it's like things start to get itchy where there's something not quite right that needs your attention, right? Being itchy is is the way your body tells you that a portion that some part of you needs more attention, right? And to notice that itchiness, right? Which is suggesting a reversal, because that's a huge part of the Venus retrograde is it's bringing things up, and it's bringing up what you're connected to, what your passions are connected to, which may be partnership, it may be your personal investiture, your passion for a project you're doing, a career you're doing, the career you're doing, a hobby, whatever. It's like this emotional focus. Um, and the Venus retrogrades bring that up for question. And very often people sort of go back and forth with, well, what if I didn't do this? Or is this as important to me now as it has been? Right? Is this something I've just sort of taken for granted? And a lot of times people will feel a fading of passion, or an uncertainty about what they're usually quite in what they've come to take for granted as a place of great pleasure and enthusiasm. Well, of course I love this, and the Venus retrogrades bring that up for question. And it's not that because they're brought up for question that the planets are telling you to negate that. It's an inspection, and it's a coming back to and bringing attention to something so that you can renew the passion, or maybe it is time to move on. Maybe that is an artifact of a different time, right? Maybe that's just sort of like a still photograph of your heart from 8 years ago, and you're in a different place now. But Venus's retrograde brings that necessary reinvestigation, that check in with where you are in the living present, rather than the last time you remember, coming to the heart of things. And so all that's like getting moving and pulling you towards it during this lead up to the station.
Yeah, for sure. It's like an opportunity to change or to redesign something in your life and to revisit the foundations of that. So sometime, and usually the location of what you're going to change or revisit or redesign is whatever house Venus is going retrograde in. So sometimes people, if it's happening in their fourth house, it's like they literally redesign their home, or decide to redecorate something, which
Hey everybody, Economic Ninja here. I hope you're doing great. I have incredible news about Alchemy Pay, ACH, and XCN or Onyx coin. And I'm gonna ask you, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with XCN, or do you want to start with Alchemy Pay? Because both are incredible. Guys, do me a favor and type in which coin you have. And you know what? I might have actually hit the wrong button, because, oh, there we go. We got somebody voting. All right, so we want to start with XCN. Guys, text which one you guys want me to start with, XCN or ACH, because this is incredibly bullish news. I'm not joking. I'm watching digits go up. I hope you are too. And let's see who's going first. All right, here we go. Here we go. All right, XCN wins right now. But guys, keep typing which coin you guys have. Okay, so let's go to Alchemy Pay. All right, first off, I showed you about ACH or Alchemy Pay because it's a real company. All right, there are a lot of scams out there, a lot of meme coin scams, ERC20 token scams, just a ton of scams. And when we can identify a real company with a real use case for its token, and then see it grow, and it's got a small market cap. In this case, when I brought this out to my newsletter subscribers, and also just so you guys know, if you want to follow me on X, that's where I'm going to start putting out the projects we're looking at first, okay? Because we want you to get both sides. It's one thing to see it on my newsletter, but it's another thing for you to see me talk about it on X, and then all of a sudden you can get all of the people that like the project and hate the project, right? You could make the best decision for you, because that's what it's all about, you doing the work, right? Well, Alchemy Pay was at $180 million market cap, and I'm like, this is a much more valuable project. They're doing, no joke, like they have over 100. I mean, it could be a couple hundred now partnerships with companies around the world, right, to onboard them for payment processing from fiat to crypto, including Binance, right? And that story's about to come up in a second. Well, Alchemy Pay just came out with a new story. We are now a registered money services business with FinTrack in Canada. So just the other day we talked about Australia, right? Now they're set up and fully registered with the government of Canada. This says it's enhancing our compliance for a safer crypto to fiat experience expanding our reach to provide seamless solutions in North America. So what does this mean for the company? Well, it's actually really simple. They get paid for the services they offer, right? When they go to businesses, cryptocurrency exchanges, any business, and they facilitate the onboarding of new customers and watch those customers move from fiat currencies into cryptocurrencies on that business's platform, ACH makes money, okay? So now think about this. You're buying a utility token that in the future, if they keep growing at this pace, which has been phenomenal, and you could see a massive move into this, so many eyeballs on this project, it's insane. As they continue, and I hope they do, there's no promises, this isn't financial advice, but I'm explaining why I invested in them. And a lot of you probably did. You're going to see them get more money and the token will go up in value if, only if, there's a use case and an increased desire and need for it. Well, as they get more countries to sign up and say, hey, we're gonna give you the regulatory blessing, you're good to go, that's good news, all right? So if you guys have ACH, you're super pumped on your position right now, and you're bullish, do me a favor, type ACH and give me your best guess of what ACH price will be next December. Put that down below. And as you're doing that, we're gonna switch over to XCN, and XCN's a really exciting case. Now look, real quick, I want to throw a shout out. There are a lot of people wanting to know about the 2 next courses coming up. Crypto Trader 2.0 and something about DeFi. It's I think it's going to be incredible. If you want the student pricing, you can go and check out the latest course sale, which is Crypto LLC, the Crypto LLC course, how you can start your own cryptocurrency LLC and become your own manager of money. Talk to your tax person and ask them, hey, if I start my own fund and I actually manage a company that manages my money, but it's now the company's money, do I get write-offs? You think you may actually talk to a tax professional, you may be surprised at the answer. All right, that link's down below. Check this out. Onyx, the community has spoken. I mean, we're talking loudly. You remember when I told you you should vote? And I mean, this is just my opinion, but regardless of how we all feel about Justin Sun and all that stuff, he carries a lot of clout and a lot of weight in this arena worldwide. And I said, you know, you've got to vote yes, because then him and HTX are going to buy some tokens from the DAO, and they're going to lock them up. And it's very important to exchanges want to lock up tokens and have the ability to onboard new clients, customers, so that they can stake on their exchange or mine on their exchange. I was just in a meeting about this today with one of the largest exchanges on earth, and it's important for you to understand that. And so the lockup period, the escrow, is so important, right? Because then you're guaranteed that that's 1 billion or 500 million tokens, whatever they end up getting, that are not going to be dumped onto the market. It's under a smart contract. They're locked in. At the same time, they're both putting out headlines to their massive followings around the world. Hey, isn't XCN coin great? I mean, it's a big deal, all right? Now, another big deal, and the vote. I mean, 232 votes to make this happen, which equated to 983 million tokens that voted, all right? 8 votes were against it, or 16 million. That is mind-blowing numbers. I mean, you might as well call this like the Trump race. Hey guys, do me a favor. I just love seeing it. If you voted for Trump, and even if you're around the world and you like Trump, just type Trump down below. Let's just piss off that algorithm. All right, so now, I'd be typing it to you right now, just so you know. And if you don't like him, don't worry. There's a safe space and a piece of chalk somewhere. Oh, here you go. Yeah, I got chalk, and I would draw a safe space for you if that kind of crap freaks you out. Stand by. Sorry, right now there's a bunch of liberals and it's just gotten awkward. Just crickets. All right, so there's more news. So the Onyx just came out, the guys and gals at Onyx, and they're talking about this big gas refund, right? Because the ERC20 system is expensive and cumbersome, and you almost need a side chain. We'll get into that in a second. Guys, don't give me super chats. Remember, I don't need the money, and your comments are going like this. The gas refund is expected to be the biggest one yet. Refunds will be distributed over the weekend, coming after we export, analyze, and compile the transaction data using AI. Now, why is this important? First, most people don't understand the life cycle of a cryptocurrency, from inception to listings to work, all that stuff, to advertising and all this stuff. Onyx is where it needs a side chain. It needs its own chain. Well, it's coming out with a node program, and that's the beginning of a side chain. Why is a side chain important? Well, ERC, the Ethereum network, is just bogged down with all kinds of transactions, especially when we see relatively high transactions in relation to meme coins like Trump coin. I'm not a fan, sorry. Why buy something worthless when you could buy something with meaning, right? Like XCN, you're buying it possibly to stake. You can make money on it and things like that. Well, anyway, so these transactions get so expensive. You need to run a side chain where you can actually, all of these transactions that are running up and down the side chain, you can put them into blocks and then later on record them onto Ethereum, and it's a lot cheaper. You guys, does that make sense to you? Type 1 if it makes sense to you. Not a lot of people understand this. So during the evolution of a blockchain, when a company is trying to develop something, and you've seen Chain developed XCN, and now Chain has made a use case for XCN, going, hey, we're going to give massive discounts if you buy XCN and use it with our company. So that was a huge thing. Well, now this brings us to the biggest part, and I need you to understand this. They've ran through all these little parts of the cycle of a cryptocurrency project. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do a detailed instructional video for you guys about that. I'll build it this weekend. My point being is this. Exchange listings, right? Onyx is already on CoinMarketCap. And literally, I've been talking to exchanges about getting a project that I am passionate about on multiple exchanges. And it costs a lot. The last one I talked to is $250,000 just to get their team to talk to our engineers and get that going, right? And then we've got other costs associated with it. And then, and so I'm in negotiations for those numbers, right? So you've got to have a certain amount of money raised to be able to do that. A liquidity pool built, all that kind of stuff. Now, everyone is starting to freak out over the Binance listing, and you should be. And I'm going to give you my opinion. I believe that Binance is going to list this coin, my guess, this is a guess, within 30 days. Guys, type Binance if you agree with that. And as a matter of fact, hashtag Binance, and then share this with Binance on X. I'm going to put this video on X in a few minutes. And when Binance joins in, the liquidity and the amount of money that will rush into the project will blow your mind. Now, this could be a buy the rumors, sell the news, right? Because I'm seeing a lot of chatter, and this is why I'm putting my some of my thoughts on X so that you get a really good balanced perspective of this. But right now, I want you to understand, when a coin project goes to a large exchange like Coinbase or Binance, it not only gets really liquid, it gets really popular. And that is what you need to know. Now, I teach people how to I'm about to teach you how to get into projects way prior, like Solana coins, things like that, but also DeFi stuff before they go to these big exchanges. But XCN, the people, the hardworking people at the Onyx DAO and at Chain.com, they are working diligently to get this to the forefront. It just blew through the other day the CoinMarketCap top 100. That's a big deal. I believe you're going to see this as a multi-billion-dollar asset. Now, if there are people that are still butthurt because they bought at the top and panicked in, I'm going to give you a little advice. And can everyone do me a favor and give me a thumbs up or a high five emoji, or say he's right if you agree. When you look to buy a cryptocurrency or a crypto token or something like that, and let's say you've got $1,000 or $10,000, don't go rushing in because the price went up and put all of your $1,000 or $10,000 in. What you do, if you want to be a smart investor, you're investing off of fundamentals, and if you're day trading, technical analysis. And what you do is you layer in. So let's pretend you have $1,000 and you're freaking out because all of a sudden this project's up 400% in a day or two. What you do on your $1,000, you put $100 at the top. If it goes up, be grateful. Your $100 is going up. Don't chase the pump. Then if it goes down, you go, I'll buy another $100. I know, I'm just sorry. I gotta get, because there's a lot of non-successful people in this world. You wanna know why? Because they're emotional, like liberals. One last thing, guys, do it again. Type Trump if you voted for Trump. Now, all the liberals right now, they're freaking out. Some of them are in Canada. Trust me, I already had to run into this. Check this out. Check this out. I'm doing it. I'm not even looking. I'm not even looking. Oh, wait, I'm sort of looking. Wait. Oh, crap. Oh, okay. That's a horrible circle, but it's a safe space. That's right. I could spell safe. That's where you guys sit if you didn't vote for Trump. All right, with that being said, I hope you have a great day. Enjoy.
Meme coins are taking over the internet right now. We are in a digital gold rush. Absolutely everybody is talking about meme coins. It's all over the news. You have high school kids making tens of thousands of dollars in a couple of minutes. Nobody knows how long this digital gold rush is going to last, so right now is the time to take advantage of it. I personally launched a token earlier this year called Hammy, Staring Hamster Meme, and within an hour it reached well over $1 million market cap. Fast forward a few months later, it is now in the multi-million dollar range. I'm going to show you exactly how I did it and how you can too in the next 5 to 10 minutes. This is going to be a complete beginner guide. Absolutely zero coding required. I don't think I could make this any easier for you guys, so make sure you're paying attention, make sure your other tabs are closed and you're focused because it's time to make a meme coin. So first things first, you need to have a Phantom wallet and some Solana in it. If you don't have that, pause this video, download Phantom, get some Solana in there from Coinbase or whatever exchange you use, and then get back to this video. If you have that already, great, we're ready to move on. All right, now we're going to head to oriontools.io. This is the Solana token creator website. I will leave a link in the description so you know you're going to the right place, oriontools.io. All right, now I'm going to go over here to the right-hand side, top right, and click Select Wallet. Click Phantom Wallet, and I'm going to go over here and click on Connect My Wallet. There we go, Phantom Wallet connected. All right, once our wallet is connected, we are ready to start creating our token. This is so simple. You can see right here, there's a guide on the right-hand side, but because you're watching this video, I'm gonna walk you through the entire process. So you can see over here, name, symbol, decimals, image, supply, and description. Obviously, before you get started, you need to have a token idea. You need to know what you're going to create. I already have an idea for this video, so I'm gonna show you guys how it's done with an example token. So for this video, I just thought of a random thing in Midjourney, came up with an AI image of a monkey head. I'm gonna call this Beanie Monkey, Beanie Monkey. Beanie Monkey. The symbol is going to be BM. This is the ticker symbol, just like how Amazon is AMZN, Shopify SHOP. Beanie Monkey's symbol is going to be BM. We have our decimals here at 6, which we're not going to touch. Just uploaded the image of our Beanie Monkey, monkey with the beanie hat. Now for your supply, you can do as many or as little tokens as you want. I recommend at least 1 billion supply. 1 billion is just the sweet spot for a lot of meme coins. So for this video, I'm going to do 1 billion tokens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9. There we go, we have 1 billion supply, and for your description, just write a simple description for the name of your token. Actually, I'm gonna make this capital M. Beanie Monkey is the coolest monkey in the kingdom. Just something short and sweet is really all you need. You don't really even need a description, so if you can't think of something, don't even worry about it. And that's pretty much it. You've got everything you need right here. Your name, your symbol, your decimals, your supply, your logo, and a little description of your project. Now down below here, you have the revoke freeze and revoke mint option. The step after we create our token is launching the token, which is creating a liquidity pool so people can buy and sell from that pool. In order to do that, we need to revoke our freeze authority, which allows us to create a liquidity pool you can see right here, and our mint authority, which stops us from making more tokens. So let's just symbol your decimal, just write a simple, this is the hand side, top right, and click Select Wallet to move on. All right, now we're going to head to oriontools.io. This is the Solana token creator website.
oriontools.io. Don't go there. I don't know if I've never been there. Don't go there.
I will leave a link in the description so you know you're going to the right place, oriontools.io. All right, now I'm going to go over here to the right-hand side, top right, and click Select Wallet. Click Phantom Wallet, and I'm going to go over here and click on Connect My Wallet. There we go, Phantom Wallet connected. All right, once our wallet is connected, we are ready to start creating our token. This is so simple. You can see right here, there's a guide on the right-hand side, but because you're watching this video, I'm gonna walk you through the entire process. So you can see over here, name, symbol, decimals, image, supply, and description. Obviously, before you get started, you need to have a token idea. You need to know what you're going to create. I already have an idea for this video, so I'm gonna show you guys how it's done with an example token. So for this video, I just thought of a random thing in Midjourney, came up with an AI image of a monkey head. I'm gonna call this Beanie Monkey, Beanie Monkey. Beanie Monkey. The symbol is going to be BM. This is the ticker symbol, just like how Amazon is AMZN, Shopify SHOP. Beanie Monkey's symbol is going to be BM. We have our decimals here at 6, which we're not going to touch. Just uploaded the image of our Beanie Monkey, monkey with the beanie hat. Now for your supply, you can do as many or as little tokens as you want. I recommend at least 1 billion supply. 1 billion is just the sweet spot for a lot of meme coins. So for this video, I'm going to do 1 billion tokens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There we go, we have 1 billion supply. And for your description, just write a simple description for the name of your token. Actually, I'm gonna make this capital M. Beanie Monkey is the coolest monkey in the kingdom. Just something short and sweet is really all you need. You don't really even need a description, so if you can't think of something, don't even worry about it. And that's pretty much it. You've got everything you need right here. Your name, your symbol, your decimals, your supply, your logo, and a little description of your project. Now down below here, you have the revoke freeze and revoke mint option. The step after we create our token is launching the token, which is creating a liquidity pool so people can buy and sell from that pool. In order to do that, we need to revoke our freeze authority, which allows us to create a liquidity pool you can see right here, and our mint authority, which stops us from making more tokens. So let's just say I launch a token with a billion supply, I make it public, people are buying and selling. If I don't revoke my mint authority, I could just print another million tokens, dump that onto the market, dilute the supply. We do not want to do that, so we're going to revoke our mint authority. People also look for mint authority being revoked before they buy a token, so if you don't revoke your mint authority, they're not going to buy your token. It's just a big red flag. So we're
Mint authority.
going to check this off. It is required. Once again, if you don't do this, nobody's going to buy your token. You need to revoke your mint authority. So both of these are checked off. We got our logo, we got our name.
Your mint authority.
Decimal, supply, description, it all looks good. Double, triple check, because once you create your token, you cannot go back. These are immutable, meaning you cannot change any of this stuff. Once it is out there, it is on the blockchain forever. So just make sure you're doing it correctly. All right, this all looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and click on create token. Transaction confirmation, wait a couple seconds for it to pop up. Here we are. It's going to cost us about 0.5 Solana to create our token, and you can see right here we're going to receive 1 billion unknown tokens. It says unknown because the token doesn't exist.
What? How can he, what is this? You can't just go over that. 45 Solana, man, bro. Yeah, except for the fucking 45 Solana. No, it's more. It's more. It's way more. $45 Solana, come on, man. Yeah, it's like $10,000, man.
Yet, but as soon as that token is created, it's going to show up in our Phantom wallet, unknown token, and you can see right here, pop up. Here we are. It's going to cost us about 0.5 Solana to create our token. Wait a couple seconds for it to pop up. Here we are. It's going to cost us about 0.5 Solana to create our token, and you can see right here we're going to receive 1
All 0.5.
billion unknown tokens. It says unknown because the token doesn't exist yet, but as soon as that token is created, it's going to show up in our Phantom wallet as Beanie Monkey, BM. So I'm going to go here and click on confirm, and we are all good to go. It takes about a minute or so, maybe less, depending on your internet speed, for your token to be created, but you'll see a pop up. There we go, transaction confirmed. Took me only 5 seconds or so. Check our Phantom wallet. I can scroll down here and we have 1 billion Beanie Monkey tokens in our wallet, ready to move to the next step. It's that simple. Creating a token is that simple. Now we need to make our token tradable, meaning anybody can buy and sell. So in order to do that, we need to create a liquidity pool. So we're gonna go over here to the left-hand side, click on create liquidity. So you can see right here we have our base token option and a quote token. The quote token doesn't change. We're gonna keep that Solana, but our base token is going to be our Beanie Monkey token right here. I'm gonna click on that. Then we have Beanie Monkey at the top of our base token and our quote token as Solana. So now is where we choose how many tokens we want to put in our starting liquidity pool. This is a really important decision you need to make. I recommend at least 95 to 97% of your tokens, giving yourself 2 to 3% of the supply to hold on to for marketing, for giveaways, for whatever you want to have it for. The more tokens you put in the liquidity pool, the better. And you can always buy these tokens on the market after you launch the liquidity pool. So for this video, because I'm showing you guys simply how it's done, I don't want to keep any tokens for myself. I'm not actually going to be doing anything with this token. I'm going to do max 1 billion tokens to the liquidity pool. Now is where we want to decide how much Solana we want to put in our starting liquidity pool. This essentially determines the price of your token. If I do $10,000 worth of Solana and then my entire supply of the token, it is now $10,000 with Solana and $10,000 worth of my token equals a $20,000 liquidity pool. I'm essentially pairing Solana to my token, and however much Solana I put in the liquidity pool is how much my tokens cost. You don't need $10,000, that is too much. I'm just using that as an example, as a number to mentally look at. It says right here on the right hand side, recommended 10 plus Sol. But Solana has gone for a crazy run over the last month or so. You really don't even need 10 Solana. Obviously, the more Solana, the better. One thing to keep in mind is all the Solana you enter in your starting liquidity pool, you are not going to get back. That is going to get burned. That is the last step. Once you give the liquidity pool your tokens and your Solana, it will give you back a receipt in a form of liquidity pool tokens. We burned our receipt. We can no longer take that Solana and those tokens out. Now, you may be wondering, why do I need to do this? When a project owner burns his liquidity pool tokens, the liquidity is forever locked, and people look for that before they buy your token. They will not buy your token if your liquidity pool is not locked, because that is just a huge red flag. That's just asking to get scammed. I personally will never buy a token unless I see that liquidity locked little green circle emoji. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, I already have a Solana token. It's called Hammy, and that's the only token I want to focus on. So for this video, I'm not going to launch a big liquidity pool, meaning you guys cannot buy and sell from this liquidity pool. The goal is once again just to show you guys how it's done. So instead of doing 10 Solana here or 8 Solana here, I'm going to do 0.0000 or 0.005. Very, very small amount. Basically meaning that all of these tokens equals 0.0005 Solana, almost nothing. I'm making this token pretty much worthless. Now the last step right here is our fee tier. I recommend you always keep this at 0.25, never go above that, because you're just going to be shooting yourself in the foot by creating a huge fee for anybody who wants to buy and sell your token. It's just a very, very small fee, 1/4% that goes to helping your liquidity pool out long term. Now make sure this all looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click on initialize liquidity pool, and then once I initialize the liquidity pool, our token is live. I'm going to do 0.005, making this pretty much worthless. Click on initialize liquidity pool. We're going to be sending 1 billion BM tokens to the liquidity pool and our Solana, getting back liquidity pool tokens which show up as unknown, and spending some Solana for the fees. If I was putting more Solana into the liquidity pool, this number would be higher, but because I'm not, it just shows 0.49. Click on confirm. Now in the meantime, I'll have a link in the description for the deck screener new pairs tab, where you can see all the new tokens that are being introduced to the market. After you launch your liquidity pool, your token will pop up here within about a minute or so. Here we have it right here. Beanie Monkey has showed up as a launch token. If I click this, it's already up 1800%. You can see right here this warning, this pair has very little liquidity. I launched this with almost zero liquidity, so that's why it's going to show that. But if you launch it with a normal amount of Solana, this warning is not going to show. Once again, I'm just showing you guys how it's done. Now to burn our liquidity pool tokens, we need to go over here to Sol Incinerator. I'm going to click this link right here and connect my wallet to Sol Incinerator. Connect wallet, Phantom wallet. Make sure you're on the Pro version, not the Lite version. Click on LP, and you will see our LP tokens right here. They may not be showing up in your wallet immediately, and that's totally fine. Mine show up right here. 94 LP tokens shows up as an unknown token. I'm going to burn that by clicking on it and clicking burn. Now once again, this process cannot be reversed. You cannot get back your liquidity pool tokens once you've launched. This is how you lock your liquidity for good. I'm gonna go ahead and click on confirm. Transaction will pop up, and here are my LP tokens. I'm burning my LP tokens. Click confirm, and we've officially burnt our liquidity pool tokens. So now if we go over here, transaction complete, perfect. If we go over here, in about 5 to 10 minutes or so, our liquidity pool will show up as locked. Now our token is officially live. If I wanted to go buy this token, I could go to Jupiter, connect my wallet, enter the contract address of the token, Beanie Monkey right here. You can get the contract address by clicking this little button right here. Copy that. Now it's going to be really hard to buy and sell this token because of the small liquidity pool and the amount of transactions just fluctuating. I'm not going to buy and sell this. I don't want you guys to buy and sell this. This is just to show how it's done. Now the next step would be to update your deck screener page right here by scrolling down, clicking on Update Token Information.
What's up, guys? In this video I'm going to be going over exactly step by step how you can launch your own pumped out fun meme coin on the Solana blockchain. All you're going to need is a phantom wallet with a little bit of soul in it. So let's hop right into it. So first things first, obviously you want to go on the website Pump Fun and click at the top here, start a new coin. And now it's kind of the tricky part. It's coming up with a name, an idea, right? I already have mine. It's going to be Little Frog. It's going to go along with this cute little picture I have over here of this frog. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And one of the things to be wary about though is there is a cost to deploy. So it's 0.02 soul, which is going to be like a couple dollars you're going to have to pay every time you make a coin. So when you click create here, you have the option to actually invest some money into the coin itself as soon as it launches, right? The amount that you put here originally is an amount that is proportional to how much you'll get back when you sell. So for example, if you put in 0.03 and someone apes in 10 soul, you might get back like 1.5 soul. But let's say you put in 3 soul and someone apes in 10 soul, you'll get back like 6 soul. You make a lot more depending on how much you invest. And the amount that you invest here, you pretty much get all of that back. You might lose a little bit to fees, a couple, maybe like $1 to fees or pennies to fees, but you're not losing much. The majority you're losing to these pump funds is going to be the cost to deploy here, which is like $3, $4, $5, whatever it is, right? So what you're going to do is you have the name, the ticker, and the image as well as the description. You actually, no, wait a second. One thing you want to do to make sure you actually are successful is add a Twitter, a Telegram, and a website. I'm not going to do that for the sake of this tutorial, but if you add a Twitter, you create your own Twitter, you create a Telegram, you create a website, there's going to be a much higher chance that you actually win this pump fun kind of battle, right? So I'm just going to launch it now just to show you guys what that looks like. 0.03. I should have enough in there to do it. Let's see. Perfect. So let's go see where it's at. Again, this is without a website, a Twitter, or anything. One thing you're going to see, so look, someone's already bought 1.3 soul worth, right? So that's actually pretty big. What I might actually do is so right now I could sell out for about a 0.002 profit, which in reality, because of the fees, it's not really much of a profit at all. And it really comes down to how much I invested originally. As you can see here, I invested such a small amount, so I get back such a small amount. But the coin's doing decent. You got some decent buys here. If there's no buys soon, this guy's probably going to sell out. That's normally what happens with these. It's either like you get a lot of momentum and you're going to see buys and buys and buys, or it's going to slow down and then everyone sells out. I would sell out here to just... that's probably what I would do just to get out of this, because I don't like pump fun and I don't like losing money. So here, I'll just show you guys what it looks like to sell out of your trade. Just like that, you click 100%, you click place trade, and then you can just sell out immediately for a slight... Oh, it didn't go through. Let's try again. Sometimes it doesn't go through and stuff. Maybe I don't have enough in my wallet for fees. Yeah, I probably don't have enough in my wallet for fees. You do not want this issue. Make sure you put enough money um, within your original wallet that you create with. I just put a small amount for this video, but put like $20, however much you want to invest. Make sure you have a couple dollars extra so that you're able to, pay off those fees when you try to sell. As you can see here, this can happen if you don't have enough. I definitely don't. But I'm not worried. This is like $5. It's a test video. I don't really care. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much the entirety of how to create a pump fund token. Now you can go into the threads here. You can maybe comment. You can maybe make even Reddit posts about it. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Send this to the moon. Right? You can do pretty much anything you want now. You can sell out for little pennies of profit, but I don't think it's really worth it. The best thing to do is have a Twitter, a Telegram, and a website, and really try to let this thing fly. If it gets on Radium, so if you get it to the king of the hill and then it hits the bonding curve and stuff and it gets on Radium, you'll really make a good profit. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's how you launch a coin. If you liked the video and you found any entertainment or information from it, all I ask is just comment, like, and subscribe. That's all I really ask for. I don't have any courses or anything, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'm out.
I launched more than 7 meme coins, like this one that went up to more than $3 million market cap. Now you know that most of the meme coins I bought, I always say that I lost money, and it's true. If you check the numbers, I lost around $10,000 on my different launch. But this is what people see. Actually, I made a lot more, and this is with stuff you might not see. You might not like what you would see in this video, but I'm gonna explain you everything of what's behind those meme coins and what I learned. By the way, welcome to Handsome Final, the channel that puts you the reality of what's happening on the blockchain in front of you. We are intense launch. I never saw it. Wanna make it? Watch it. The first launch we are going to talk about is Soul Lit, which is a project that had an intense launch. I never saw that before. If you look the size of the candle, in the same minute, we can go from 500k market cap to as low at 88k market cap. The price doing 5x in the same minute because a lot of people wanted to buy this coin. Because they saw me live on YouTube and they saw this is great, the developer is live, we can see it, it's not anonymous. I mean, the project is okay, it's all about the lit language, so there's a lot of background and history around it. It's fine, but then we had few problems with this launch. Is that a lot of bots were on it, so of course, because they see a lot of people trying to buy and the price doing 5x in the same minute, this is really lucrative for bots. But on the other side, no one's going to stop trading because everyone wants to be first. We had a massive pullback from 600k market cap to 100k market cap, as normally most of the coins will die, and this one went back up crazy high in just few minutes, hitting the $2.5 million market cap. And we are here, as you can see on my time zone, almost at midnight. So it was time for me to sleep. And I say I'm gonna disconnect from the live. And that's where, of course, all the investors will be kind of egoistic, and that's normal. They say, no, don't go out the live, keep the live on. We want to be sure. And I managed to try to keep the live on, but still the price was dropping. It was a great launch, great jokes and stuff like that. And then the price went back up, higher than ever, at 4 a.m. I was not awake. And then we went up to $3 million. But as you can see, again, in the same minute, we are at 2 million market cap, jumping up to 3 million market cap. Can you imagine the size and the dimension of what we are talking about? And that's when I realized that launching live is nice, but this one was too powerful. So powerful that it breaks everything. what is interesting about this project is that, of course, like people would ask me, what is the roadmap? What are we gonna do? When we always show the roadmap here, that's what it is. There's no roadmap. It's a meme coin. A meme coin, you don't do anything special. You just do meme. We had the first community takeover that ended up being pretty bad. Most of the people that say they're gonna do a community takeover, because I know I've been doing 5 coins, so every time they say we're gonna do community takeover, it's mostly people who do just blah 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 on Telegram, and they don't put any work. And when I say they don't put any work, on meme coins, it's the attention economy. It's an attention market. So if you cannot bring attention to your Twitter account, if you did not grow an audience before, you didn't put in the work. Growing an audience is hard and it takes time. We will talk about it later. I'm spitting facts and make you understand what kind of crowd you have in the room, because if you read the room, it's like in stand-up comedy, then you can do better jokes and also being able to understand what will happen and how it will happen. On this coin, a lot of people made a lot of money because, of course, if someone was buying at $3 million, someone was selling. So only people who bought at the top here, and there can only be 1 or 10 people, only them should be in loss. The other one were just, they had greed. Like if you bought here and did it sold here, it's greed. You sold, you will have more, more, and more. You waited here, you still did not sell, and then it done. We have to understand the market behavior. It's all about player versus player. So the only person you can blame is either yourself or yourself. The second coin is Handsome Pepe. Another super interesting launch because we launched it with a different way. And that one, the main goal was to show to my community in the investors boardroom how you can launch a meme coin fast. And from start to finish, on having nothing to have the website, the Telegram, the Twitter, and all that ready. It took us 3 hours, maximum 4 hours. Could have been faster, but I wanted to show all the steps. And it was with someone from the investors boardroom, so we were just 2 on it, just with another dev. That one was also a YouTube live, and seriously, if you are a meme coin trader or any kind of investment in crypto, everything you learn here will be so valuable, because meme coins is just crypto with speed 2 or speed 4. We launched with popped out fund, which means we did not need to create a liquidity pool. The goal was to be able as well to have a bigger liquidity pool when we launched. It was a super fast launch. In less than 10 minutes, less than 5 minutes, we were out on the market. People were buying this like crazy, like it was the best croissant, and probably it is the best croissant. So as you can see, we have 2 massive candles which raised up all the money from it, with the developer being here. That's me, 3.4% that I own of this token, and it went up to 600k. Now it did a classic pattern of meme coin, which is we go up, we go down, we go up either to the same level or a little bit higher or a little bit lower, and then it goes down again and then die out. That's a typical pattern. Still though, on this one we can see some massive candles that double the market cap from 300k to 600k. And again, we had a lot of people, a lot of bots making some money in it. So you see the other coin, we saw that went to 3 million market cap. Here, because of me, because of this loan, some people made 15k, 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 12k, 11k, 11k, 11k. Think a lot of people made money. Now you start to understand a bit more that most of the money that will be made in crypto and as normal and in general in meme coins will be concentrated to only a few people. So now you understand that it's not 50% makes money and 50% lose money. It's more 10% that makes money and 90% that doesn't, because they don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge, I don't know, but